This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto remembered a life he never lived in the forest of death. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Three kids were huddled in a hollow beneath the roots of a huge tree in a gloomy, dark forest. The girl was on the verge of falling asleep, and both boys were unconscious. The girl was dressed in a red dress that hung down to her mid-thighs with slits on the sides, shorts underneath for decency, a full head of pink hair, and a slightly oversized forehead over her head. A dark strip of cloth with an etched stylized leaf on a metal plate held her hair back partially. In an attempt to shake off her fatigue, the girl wet and squeezed out a washcloth, which she then applied to the dark-haired boy's forehead. The boy with the dark hair was clearly in pain and his breathing was irregular. As far as one could see, the blonde boy wearing a forehead protector similar to the ones the other two were wearing was unconscious but not in any pain. The blonde boy was Uzumaki Naruto, the dark-haired boy was Uchiha Sasuke, and the girl was Haruno Sakura, or was he? He opened his eyes to find darkness. Am I dreaming? He asked himself. He was persuaded that this was untrue by a knot beneath his shoulder and a flash of light that came through what he recognized as branches and roots. I'm under a tree. He asked himself, how did I end up here? Eating another disgusting creation made by my uncute fiancé, Akane? Is the last thing I can recall. No, that's not correct. The last thing I recall is that long-haired, pale snake bastard splattering fingers and punching me in the stomach. Which one is it? Click. He looked up to see Sakura-chan turn slowly around, holding a kunai, and sitting up rigidly at the sound. He overheard her ask naively, a squirrel? Geez, don't scare me like that. The kunai was thrown, and the irritated face turned to one of desperation. Hee. A nasty voice laughed from beyond his field of vision. Up all night? But it's no longer necessary. Wake up, Sasuke-kun, we want to fight him? Wah. Sakura stumbled as she reached into her weapons pouch for another kunai. What are you talking about? I know someone called Orochimaru is pulling the strings from the shadows. What is his purpose? What is this weird mark on Sasuke-kun's neck? You did this to him, and now you want to fight? The same man's voice began. I wonder what that man is thinking. But after hearing that, we can't let you go, said a different person. I'll kill this girl, and I'll also kill this Sasuke guy. Wait, Zaku, the first voice said. Huh? Why? The voice said, you're not very good, obviously ignoring Zaku. Then there was dirt scraping. A recently overturned stone. Different colored earthgrass doesn't grow here. Sakura gasped. A booby trap is pointless unless it goes unnoticed. PFT, stupid, Zaku sneered. So that kunai was to prevent the squirrel from setting off the trap. Well, the first voice went on, since we have no use for this girl, kill her. Although he was unable to see Sakura's face, he could hear a twang as a taut wire was cut and her hand moved in tandem with the kunai. A shadow quickly came into view, exposing a massive log that was swinging like a pendulum. At Sakura's trap, he tried to smile proudly, but his face was not cooperating, and he could only wince due to the waning pain in his stomach. The three sound nin who had threatened them right before the first part of the exam started were in the air from a jump, and a heavy rain of splinters was falling when he looked back outside due to an explosion. Frankly speaking, said the fur-coated one as he spoke, he seemed uncannily composed, as if they hadn't just been almost crushed. You have no talent, people like you have to work harder, a weakling like you shouldn't mess with guys like us. He couldn't see them with Sasuke in the way because they had already landed, but he could definitely hear their footsteps, indicating that they weren't attempting to be cunning, they had faith in their own triumph. Konoha Senpuu, an unidentified fighter, entered the fray, and the sound of skidding indicated that the attack was successful. He saw a black, bowl-cut head of hair just outside the hollow, which could only belong to one of the ninjas in the area. How'd I know that boy? He asked himself. Rock Lee. Did I just assume they were all ninjas? We are, of course. I'm one myself. I was only accepted as a ninja after saving Iruka-sensei by beating the living daylights out of Mizuki-sensei, who attempted to kill us both, and learning a technique called the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu that splits me into solid clones. Was it all a dream? I graduated from the Ninja Academy just a few months ago, at the bottom of my class. Lee remarked sarcastically, then, you guys should also work harder. Being immobile, he was unable to move to see what was on Fuzzy Brow's shoulder, but he could see something bushy and brown. The voice of the ninja with the bandaged face and furry coat said, who are you? Fuzzy Brows confidently answered, I am the beautiful green beast of Konohagakure, Rock Lee. With timidity, Sakura asked, why are you here? Fuzzy Brows proclaimed, I will always show up when you are in trouble. Then, without the brown and bushy thing on his shoulder, he stood back up after bending down with something. Though it seemed as though the boy was not addressing Sakura or the sound nin, he said, "Hee, it's actually thanks to you, now go." Then there was a tense silence. He made an effort to move, but all he could do was lift his head briefly before it dropped back down. What caused my stomach to hurt so much after being struck? The pain should have subsided by now, but did he hit me more than once? Since Ryuga is obviously a better fighter than I am, why wouldn't the snake bastard know how to do it as well? I used to do something similar to Ryuga. Who is Ryuga, I wonder? And every time I think of the name, I picture black piglets wearing bandanas with stripes like tigers around their necks. He noticed movement just above his head and a squirrel staring down at him. Could this be Fuzzy Brow's bushy friend? In any case, why was a squirrel in the forest of death? He was able to slowly raise his hand to the creature, and after giving it a curious sniff, it grabbed his finger and bit it experimentally. However, the taste was obviously not to its liking, so no further attempts were made to replicate the nibble. He stopped observing and trying to move correctly when he heard a tearing and rumbling sound from outside. He noticed Fuzzy Brows clutching one of the enormous tree roots outside. That thing is as thick as the enormous snake that sucked me up before I managed to catch up to Sakura-chan and Sasuke Teme during their battle against the snake bastard. The incoming sound nin that had caused Kabuto-kun to throw up after a strike that failed to connect was blocked by the root. With the torn-out root held roughly above his head, Lee questioned, "There's some trick to your attacks, right? I'm not simply going to dodge it, since I've seen your attacks before." Lee threw the root away and began removing the bandages from his hands. He watched as Lee ducked, vanished, and then reappeared beneath the charging sound nin, his leg outstretched in a kick that struck the teenager's chin and launched him skyward. When the ninja reached the apex and began to fall, Lee reappeared behind them, and the bandages from his arms encircled his opponent. Lee yelled, "Take this," as they began to spin, Omid Renge. It became momentarily impossible to see as dust kicked into the air. With a sigh, he attempted to sit up but collapsed again. Why is moving so difficult for me? I did not sustain any injuries severe enough to cause this type of mobility issue. No way. He forced his head off the ground in response to Lee's cry to discover that the sound nin had been upside down and had survived the attack, buried in soft dirt to his chest. He fell back to the ground and began a self-examination that did not involve the use of his eyes or limbs. He has no foreign objects in his body, no broken limbs, no pulled muscles, no cuts or bruises, and no other physical reason why I shouldn't be able to move normally. Hold on a second, how can I know how to do that? Only the Hyuga, as far as I'm aware, can see such things without taking their patient's clothes off. Why am I wondering? Cologne taught me how to do this after I killed Saffron. Why do I feel like I've learned something from a toiletry item all of a sudden? Lee-san. Sakura-chan's cry roused him from his bewildered reverie. He turned to see Fuzzy Brows tumbling to the ground. The bandaged sound nin gloated, "There's a little trick here," and held up his right arm, exposing a metal device that resembled a bracer and had multiple holes running the length of the forearm. "You can't just dodge my attacks." Sakura made a questioning noise as she glanced between their assailants and her savior's prone form. "It's sound," said the ninja smugly. "Even if you dodge my fist, sound will attack you." "Do you know what sound actually is?" Sakura mumbled, "Vibration," as she realized, exactly, the sound nin said. "Hearing sound means that your eardrums are catching the shaking air. The human eardrum will break by sounds exceeding 150 MHz, and deeper in the ear lies the inner ear membrane. When this is damaged, you lose your balance. Hey, you won't be able to move your body as you wish for a while." He re-examined himself and discovered that, contrary to what he had begun to assume based on what he had heard, his inner ear was unharmed. "Lame old taijutsu won't work against us," Zaku said, disappearing from view. Lee held his bleeding ear and grunted. Zaku said, "Well, you were doing well." Something clicked in his mind. "The Hiryu Shoten-ha. You made me use my jutsu. Of course you failed. I can freely control supersonic sound waves and air pressure. It sounds like the method I learned from the old ghoul. I have the power to destroy even a rock." I thought as flashing pictures of a boy with a striped bandana sticking his finger into a rock and causing it to explode appeared. "I have to try harder. Can't just lie about all day. My friends are in danger and need me. Blasting air into the earth and creating a cushion is nothing. Ours are different from your stupid techniques." Leaning his shoulders on a raised portion of the hollow, he was able to push himself back a few inches and see the one with the bandages covering his face charge in for the kill by using all of his remaining concentration. Unwilling to cooperate as the sound nin would have preferred, Lee somehow managed to veer out of the way and, to everyone's surprise, launched an attack despite having an inner ear rupture. Konoha senpuu. But the attack never ended because the injury caught up with him. The sound nin blocked the incoming leg and charged in with his special attack, which Lee had to block with his forearms because he was unfocused and sluggish. The sound nin yelled. This arm multiplies the small sounds produced to their ultimate level, above the din of his own assault. You could say it's a speaker. Distortions made their way toward Lee's left ear from the holes on the sound nin's gauntlet. But the sound doesn't follow the direction of the arm. I use my chakra to make sure it always attacks my prey. Where have I heard that before? Chakra. All ninjas and some samurai use chakra, which is the energy created by the body and spirit, to launch attacks and improve their skills. But wait, isn't that what ki is for? Ki is the spirit's energy, but that's only half of it. In order to have chakra, one must combine it with body energy. I've been doing this for a while now, beginning at the academy, but I've also been using ki to improve my skills and techniques for years. He was startled out of his internal debate by sudden movements in his field of vision, and he saw Sakura hurl a handful of shuriken at the bandaged sound nin. Zaku moved in front of the throwing stars before they could reach their target. He blasted the shuriken back with a powerful gust of air, barely missing the two boys in the hollow. Behind Sakura, the girl sound nin materialized and grabbed her hair tightly. A mocking remark was made by the older girl, much more luster than me. PFT, trying to be a sexy ninja? If you have time to treat your hair, then you have time to train, you female swine. Zaku, kill that Sasuke guy in front of this boy chaser's eyes. Let's teach this one a lesson. As Sakura and Lee struggled, he watched in tense silence, thinking, if only I could move properly. Sasuke Tami's neck began to steam. Orochimaru's bite mark smacked of corruption and negative energy. Why did I feel that? Wasn't I able to tell the difference between the feel of energy before? The female sound nin said, useless, which caused him to turn to see Sakura holding a kunai. That won't work against me. Sakura asked smugly, what are you talking about? And swung her kunai in an upward arch, making a tearing sound and sending the sound nin girl reeling back. Sakura-chan's favorite thing about herself is her hair, which she chopped off in order to loosen up. I miss having a pigtail. Wait, I never had one. What's happening? Zaku shouted, kill her. What's causing me to recall things I've never done? Why'd I recall locations I've never been to? What's causing me to recall odd things I've never seen? I've never experienced strange tastes in my mouth or training, so why did I feel the need to shout that I'm the best all of a sudden? I want a cup of ramen noodles, but why? He looked back outside and saw Sakura mimicking a bulldog with Zaku's arm. Sakura had taken a large bite out of it and was refusing to let go despite Zaku's repeated strikes. Let go of me, he said. Damn it, let go. It stoked a fire inside him to see the girl he had a long-term crush on get hurt. That's it. Using all his strength, he was able to push himself up the root wall behind him a little more. The evil energy intensified as Sasuke Teme groaned. He was able to raise himself a bit further at last. Sakura-chan released Zaku's arm and collapsed to the floor. I'll be standing in a little while. All eyes were on the two as Zaku roared, you brat, and pointed his hands at her. A bit more, please. Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji suddenly materialized between Sakura-chan and Zaku. The last was pulled by his scarf and was obviously not fully willingly taking part in the activities his teammates had organized. The sound nin were in their line of sight. There, I'm awake. PFT, Zaku sneered, more weirdos have appeared. I feel like lead in my body. Sakura, Ino said with assurance. I won't lose to you. I've already told you that. I won't let you be the only one to look good in front of Sasuke-kun. The bandaged sound nin remarked, looks like more leaf insects have scurried into the open. Damn you legs, I have to get moving now, go. What are you two thinking? Choji pleaded frantically. These guys are too dangerous, we'll be eaten. Shikamaru, let go of my scarf. Shikamaru said, yeah, right, idiot. He was no more assured than Choji, but it looked like he had no choice but to be there. This sucks, but we have no choice. If Ino is coming out, then we men can't run away. Alright, let's get ahead of ourselves. Whoops. He managed to keep himself upright by catching the root just before he fell. I'm sorry to get you guys involved, Ino continued, but we are a team, and we share the same destiny. Somehow, Shikamaru sighed, we'll get through this. Alright, my balance seems a little off. I must be shorter than I used to be, but I'm not short. I'm a boy growing up. Oh, give it up, get back to your normal self, and begin assisting Sakura-chan. Zaku grinned and said, you can leave if you want, fatty. The insult made Choji tense. What did he say? The plump preteen boy asked stoically. I couldn't hear him. All right, one step, the balance is still there. If you want to, Zaku replied. You can run away, fat ass. Fantastic. I understand. I am able to walk. I am able to walk. In denial, Shoji yelled angrily. I am not a fat ass. I'm just chubby, damn it. Yay. Hooray for chubby people. Alright. This is a war between the sound and the leaf. Shikamaru moaned, man, oblivious to the fact that the commotion had distracted the blonde boy, who had fallen back to the ground nearly exactly where he had been when he had first woken up. This is going to suck. Ow. That's our line, Zaku snarled. Sakura, Ino said. Take care of those two, alright. Time for Ino team's full power. Yeah. I had it, damn it. I was out and about. This time, it wasn't quite as hard to stand up, but his stifling clothing made his movements too awkward. Since the jacket is too tight, it might as well be taken off. No, that jacket was a birthday present. I'm not letting it go. Yes, I will. Indeed. No, I'm not saying I'll discard it. When I'm not in danger, I'll continue to wear it. Wringing the jacket over his head without unzipping it, he found himself no longer objecting to his own suggestion. And by the way he's moaning, he'll wake up soon. I've got to get into this fight, to give the others a better chance. Sasuke Teme was leaking more evil energy. He was distracted from his conversation by the sound of a terrible wind and watched as Zaku blasted the sound nin girl into a tree. How much time did I spend fighting with myself? As he watched the drama play out, he wondered. When Zaku said, hey, you were confused, he laughed. The bandaged sound nin clarified, the stupid scrolls are not our goals, nor to safely complete this exam, it's Sasuke-kun. It reminds me of the Tendo's reaction when Pops and I first arrived at their house. Who are the Tendos? Great, now I have a headache. I should have just resorted to lying against the root. That way, I wouldn't be so confused, and I'm an orphan who never had a father. So how did I learn martial arts while traveling with him for 10 years? It wasn't until I joined the academy 6 years ago that I began learning how to fight. I couldn't have gone on a 10-year training trip at the age of 12. I mean, I didn't, forever. I was going to say that, but it's unfair. So you concur with me? Oh no, I'm fighting with myself over things that never happened, but why? I was there because they did. No, I wasn't. One bored voice said, bah, I can't take any more of this, from a treetop. Some minor sound nins bullying these second-rate ninjas and declaring a victory? Zaku growled, they keep coming out like cockroaches, as he glanced up at the branch from which the voice had come. Well, I've missed even more now. You made a mistake, the voice from the top of the tree said. That knocked out freak right there is from our team, and you're going to pay for that. Why does it feel like someone is watching me? Even though Sasuke Teme is still asleep, everyone is staring up the tree at Fuzzy Brow's teammate. The voice up the tree warned, I'm going all out if you are going any further. Who is that? Hee, the bandaged sound nin chuckled. If you don't like it so much, then stop acting cool and come down here. No, the voice said, it seems that won't be necessary. Sakura-chan exclaimed, Sasuke-kun, with excitement. You're awake, huh? Oh my god, Sasuke Teme is taking my thunder now. At what time did he awaken? And when did he get the left half of his body covered in tattoos? Those seal marks, which resemble the ultimate moxibustion the old pervert used on me to drain me of all my strength, are not tattoos, and the evil energy is practically bursting from the seals. How am I aware of that? Who is the old pervert, anyway? When did someone steal all of my strength? I can't recall ever having that experience naturally. When I was 16, I'm 12 years old. Sasuke began, Sakura, in a menacing manner. Who did that to you? Sasuke-kun. Who? Zaku exclaimed with confidence. We did it. His teammates didn't appear to be as confident. Sakura-chan stumbled. Sasuke-kun, without even noticing her other teammate was awake. Your body. Raising his left hand, Sasuke Teme examined it. Don't worry, Sasuke said with assurance. I feel power overflowing within me. I feel great. Why did Sasuke Teme get up smelling like power? But I can barely move after fighting that snake bastard. It's unfair. No, I don't want that power. If he uses it excessively, it will kill him just as Ryuga killed himself after abusing the Shishi Hokoden. The dark emotions will rip at him until he has no more feelings. Zankuyukyuha. He was startled out of his reverie by the roar just in time to feel the pressure of the air rush in his direction. He had no idea what he was doing, but all of a sudden he was in midair, staring down at the funnel of slicing air blasts that had ripped through the hollow they had been in just a few feet below. Only a pale-eyed boy with very noticeable veins around his sockets followed Zaku and the bandaged Sound Nin in his leap from where he was standing on a branch, with Sakura-chan and Sasuke Teme behind them. How did I accomplish that? Why'd I have that question? That's what I've been doing for months. No, I haven't. Yes, I have. And I just launched myself into the air like a cannon shooting a ball using my ki. Am I crazy? I would be more concerned about the landing than any potential insanity. The ground rushed up to meet him as he looked down. He flipped in the air, landing on his feet beside Sakura-chan and stumbling to his knees out of instinct, but not nearly as gracefully as he somehow knew he should have been able to. He turned to see Sasuke Teme swat Zaku casually a few meters away before the Sound Nin even realized he was there after hearing the sounds of fleshy impact. Sasuke Teme performed a series of hand seals in rapid succession. Kaden. Housenka no Jutsu. After spitting at the Sound Nin, Sasuke Teme's mouth produced a number of fireballs. Zaku mocked the attempt and attempted to use his air attack to blast the fireballs away, but his efforts were only partially successful. Although the fires were put out, it was discovered that there were solid objects inside the shuriken. Zaku was cut in multiple places because he was unprepared for this. Can he create fireballs? Can regular mortals even do that? Sasuke Teme uses them constantly, so of course it is. It's his preferred weapon, just as creating clones is mine. Can I create my own clones? That's fantastic. If I had known how to do that, Saffron would never have been able to defeat me. Who is Saffron? The bandaged Sound Nin yelled, Zaku, below, in warning. When he looked up, he saw Sasuke Teme standing over a prone Zaku. Sasuke's hands had pulled the Sound Nin's arms back, and the Teme's foot was on Zaku's back, which was a dangerous position. You're proud of these arms? Sasuke Teme sarcastically questioned. Then Zaku's back was pushed and said appendages were quickly pulled. Click. Zaku cried out in agony, AWW, as he collapsed to the ground, limp, with nothing to break the short fall. When Sasuke Teme turned to the bandaged Sound Nin, Zaku lay whimpering in pain. Coldly, you're the only one left, he said. I hope you'll let me have more fun. This is not how Sasuke Teme used to act, did he not? No, he wasn't vicious, even though he might have been heartless. He was apparently not alone in this belief, as Sakura-chan showed by throwing herself at him in a glomp that might as well have been shampoos. Why do I keep thinking about toiletries and spices? Stop, she cried out, begging, please stop. The seals that had covered half of Sasuke Teme's body began to slowly peel off, and the snake bastard's bite mark was the only place the evil energy was contained. Then the boy passed out, exhausted, in Sakura-chan's embrace. The bandaged Sound Nin said, you are strong, and held out the earth scroll that Orochimaru had swallowed. It was remarkably similar to the one their team had previously had. The Sound Nin placed the scroll on the ground and proceeded to gather his fallen allies. Sasuke-kun. We can't defeat you at this time. Here is a gift. Please let us leave. This may seem convenient, but there is something we must find out now. But I will promise you this, if there is another situation where we meet in this exam, we will neither run nor hide. Am I a piece of chopped sushi? Why isn't he scared of me? I'm still fine because I'm barely able to move, and I was exhausted from that jump. Yes, exactly. Sakura had a determined expression on her face as the three Sound Nin slowly withdrew from the clearing where they had all been fighting. She called out, wait. Who is Orochimaru? What did he do to Sasuke-kun? Why Sasuke-kun? I don't know, the bandaged Sound Nin admitted. We were only told to kill Sasuke-kun. Well, the risk is gone now, and I can begin answering all of my questions without worrying about getting hurt. Where to begin? Well, the last thing I can recall is eating one of Akane's, onigiri, and experiencing severe nausea, seizures, sweats, and stomach cramps. Alright, so when did that occur? The day before our wedding. I was 19, and she was thrilled about the occasion, but not about me. I am 12, so perhaps she accidentally included an aging mushroom, and one of my competitors sent me somewhere? That can't be true. Oji-san told me when we discussed it that I was born in Konoha the night the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked, which is why it was sealed into me while my cut umbilical cord wasn't healed. However, if I was born here, that must mean that I died, right? Why am I still alive, then? He asked himself, who am I? Without realizing he had said it out loud. Shoji mumbled, oi, Shikamaru, it looks like Naruto-kun has amnesia, while he ate some chips from a recently opened bag. How troublesome, sigh whack, ow. Ino. Why did you hit him over the head? Because that's how you cure amnesia. No, That's how you cause amnesia, how troublesome. Even in the forest of death, Team 7's time passed. A blonde boy, wearing only a pair of dark green shorts with some squiggly yellow vines curling around them, yelled, "Bonsai!" and dove off a cliff into the river below. For as long as he had been able to think, he had been convinced that this blonde boy with the whisker-like marks on each cheek was none other than Uzumaki Naruto. Memories of a different life had suddenly appeared in his mind just days before, convincing him otherwise. He still hadn't fully accepted this because, as far as he knew, it might all be a part of some complex genjutsu that was intended to drive him insane, confused, and hopeless. His new recollections also show that he was Saotome Ranma, master martial artist, who reportedly passed away at the age of 19 as a result of his fiancée's poor cooking abilities. Naruto had felt lethargic and more conscious of his physical weakness and slowness after receiving these new memories. He had previously disregarded this and attempted to make up for it by projecting confidence and bluster. He was now conscious of his shortcomings and knew a number of solutions. The only issue was that they would require time, which he lacked at the moment. Kersploosh. Sasuke, the sole survivor of the Uchiha massacre, had ordered him to perform menial tasks as if he were the boss, even though his teammates knew about his internal conflict. Sakura's vote in favor of Sasuke's proposal outnumbered Naruto's, which was the only reason he hadn't simply defied orders. That's how Naruto ended up drowned, with a small school of fat fish dead in front of him. Following orders, Naruto swam in their direction and moved violently as he loomed closer and closer to the aquatic vertebrates. His new self remarked, "This reminds me somewhat of my training in the Kachu Tenshin Amagorikan. Or at least the way I finally figured it out." His mind flashed pictures of a real stream goldfish being flipped out of the tank with a tiny hoop made of thin paper, and Naruto couldn't help but grin when he succeeded in slapping one fish above the water's surface while its fellows jumped out to avoid the commotion. The fish vanished from their previous location, leaving behind shadows in the water, and they struck trees along the riverbank with dull thuds, probably holding themselves in place and dead with a kunai in each. "I could devour a horse because I'm so hungry." As he noticed a few more fish that had escaped his scare, Naruto thought, however, those will work perfectly. To make the task easier, Sasuke had advised that he use cage bunshin, but Naruto felt that it was extremely risky to waste so much energy in a hostile setting like this, especially if an enemy noticed his fatigue. In addition, he had not had much time to experiment with techniques and had only just recovered from the stiffness and aches of waking over the previous few days. Another thing about this place that felt wrong now was that nobody seemed to really practice their hand-to-hand skills. Indeed, many ninja looked well and were skilled fighters, but as far as he knew, no one used kata to break into a new style or maintain an old one. No one thought that mastering taijutsu required constant practice. If they were talented, they would continue to be so, and if they weren't, they avoided using their skills instead of learning. After acquiring his new memories, Naruto realized how bad his fighting style had been. Sure, he seemed to have the stamina to outlast multiple chunin, and he could recover from almost anything with a good night's sleep, but it wasn't a good idea to rush in without thinking about anything other than trying to outlast his opponents and land a single blow every now and then. Naruto attributed this in part to his Ninja Academy teachers, who were biased against him due to the demon he held. As a result, they were unable to teach him effectively in any of their classes, which is why he most likely failed the 2 initial exams he took prior to the event that led him to learn the cage bunshin from a scroll. Since he had nearly perfected a sealed technique in a matter of hours without any guidance or support, the incident was more than sufficient evidence to Naruto that he was not necessarily at fault for not learning everything that was taught to him. But he acknowledged that he was partially to blame for his lack of learning because the cold treatment he received would make him want to play practical jokes to make them feel inferior instead of being the declared dead last who everyone teased and expected to make mistakes. He would have at least placed in the top 5 of his class, along with Sasuke, Sakura, Shikamaru, and Shino, had he gritted his teeth, ignored his treatment, and concentrated. Even though he didn't express it, Naruto knew that they were in danger just by taking the Chunin exams, and as a result, he didn't want to find himself in a similar predicament to theirs, where he woke up feeling like someone else. He had briefly thought that the fox was trying to escape the seal and was instilling false memories in his mind to divert his attention from those heinous acts after Ino had hit him on the head, but that thought was dashed when he noticed the extra markings surrounding the seal on his stomach. Growl. In relation to his stomach, it was now requesting food, which incidentally frightened off the fat fish that had been slowly approaching him. He'd scared away the largest fish he'd seen in that river, and damn, 2 fish each wouldn't be enough to satisfy his hunger. Sakura called out, "Sasuke-kun," from the camp, which was just a few meters from Sasuke's location by the river's edge. Could you light the fire with a fireball? In her, what did I ever see? Before you could shake it off, Naruto thought, she's as uncute as a Kane. Stop doing that, she is adorable. She is really uncute. Sasuke called out, Oi, Dobi, get out of the water and retrieve the fish if you want to eat, using the same bored voice he usually used. Had that child not been on his team, Naruto would have been more than happy to sweep Konohagakure's streets alongside him and use his head to clear a few clogged toilets. His arrogant demeanor was extremely annoying. As Naruto waded waist deep in cool water to remove the fish he had scared, he realized, but he has the Sharingan, he could copy and counter everything I do. One of the fundamental principles of the anything goes strategy is to adjust to an opponent and identify their weaknesses in order to create a counterattack, even though it isn't a good idea. Preventing him from having to turn off his Sharingan would wear him out far more quickly than if he had fought without it. His eyes must have some weakness, and the most obvious one would be the energy needed to maintain the special vision. Naruto! Yelled Sakura, obviously irritated, hurry up! Sasuke-kun already started a fire. And if she didn't make a fire, what did she do? Sasuke and I got the fish, and she's had well over an hour. Naruto found himself thinking all of a sudden, hey, stop treating Sakura-chan badly. Hurry, Naruto. Sasuke-kun looks hungry. Naruto muttered, which, and then slammed his hands to his mouth in disbelief. The love of his life had just been insulted. I censored it at least. I'm beginning to lose my mind, so I really need to stop this. What little I started with. Hey, Sakura produced the work of her day. Sticks to spear and grill the fish with, and Naruto sat down beside the fire, picking up the fish from the ground where they had fallen from his arms as he chastised himself for being cruel to her. Oh my goodness, what a task. I understand why she chose not to assist us in solving the problem. Glory to the mighty stick bringer. Rule over all of us mere mortals. When did I begin to use sarcasm? To begin with, Naruto scratched his head, trying to determine which fish would best meet his needs. Sakura-chan was unable to assist since she had forgotten to pack a bathing suit. All right. And I'm actually the god of war imprisoned in a human body, compelled to occasionally humble myself in order to refrain from abusing my abilities. I am? I guess I'm not as smart as I thought. I thought I'd recognize sarcasm when I heard it. Hey. Sasuke, irritated, bit a crispy piece of the finished fish he had just chosen and said, what is it, Dobi? When Naruto realized he had said that out loud, he frantically searched for something to make him cry out. He finally located it after a tense 3 seconds. I wanted the fish. He pouted, trying to make it sound as though he was furious that it had been stolen. The trick appeared to be successful, as resignation instantly took the place of suspicion. They seemed to accept it and move on because the exclamation and logic seemed to fit his Dobi persona sufficiently. Naruto listened to his teammates talk about their predicament while pretending to be sulky and taking a fish, making sure to mutter that it was a bit smaller than the one he had stated he wanted. Sasuke said, we only have about 24 hours left. Aside from the crackle of fire, the rush of the river, and the rustle of the wind in the trees, there was a tense silence. Sakura hesitantly noted, you know, there may not be any more heaven scrolls. When Sasuke asked, what do you mean? By biting into his fish, Naruto prevented himself from adding his thoughts to the statement. Why did it feel like I needed to say, thanks for stating the obvious, to Sakura-chan? Sakura clarified, because it's the 4th day of a 5-day test, that means that 80% of the test is over. There are 78 entrants, 26 teams and only 13 of each scroll, so only 13 teams could pass, at best, and I assume you guys haven't forgotten what that Orochimaru guy did to our heaven scroll. That means that the number of teams to pass went down by 1, and we can't be sure that the rest of the scrolls are intact. If one of the scrolls is destroyed, the other half is useless. As they all attempted to determine their position, a thick silence descended upon the clearing that had been transformed into Team 7's camp. After a few moments, Sasuke finally spoke up, acting as if he were the group's leader. After saying, since we left our leaf comrades, we've needed 2 days to heal our injuries, he turned to look at Naruto, who had spent a large portion of the time silently talking to himself. Sasuke obviously didn't want to acknowledge that he had also been hurt, that the cursed seal was luring him to use power and acquire it, and that it required a lot of willpower to resist the urges it brought. But even though Naruto didn't feel sorry for Sasuke, he was aware of his struggle through Ranma. We need to be more active now. Either way, the next enemy is our last chance. I'm going to get some water. Naruto groaned in frustration and made the decision to devise a plan that would suit their abilities and task. Fortunately, the container was close to the location he had selected near the fire, and he quickly found one of his blank scrolls in his utility pouch. He knew he had a blank scroll somewhere in there that he could use before beginning to peel the paper from where it was adhered to the side. He took a moment to observe how strikingly similar this blank scroll was to the Earth Scroll. But that was all he could do, for the scroll and the hand holding it were held in a larger hand than his own. Surprisingly, Naruto followed the arm to which the hand was attached and discovered a teenage boy with glasses and silver gray hair at the end. Kabuto was the one in the days leading up to the first exam. This young man had been cordial enough to give them some information about one or two of the genin they would probably encounter. His new part declared, "I don't trust him. He's trying to win someone over by acting scared and hurt, but he's being too helpful and there's just something fake about him." Naruto didn't bother to inquire about the girl whose image flashed in his mind as she was mentioned because he was already beginning to get used to the strange and unfamiliar people his new self brought up. Naruto asked, attempting to hide his sudden mistrust in his voice, "What are you doing?" Kabuto got out of his crouched position and asked, "Did you forget the rules? You're not supposed to open your scroll." Sakura roared, "Naruto, after coming to the same conclusion as Kabuto, you could have disqualified us all." Naruto demanded, "What are you talking about?" As Sasuke emerged from behind a rock, "I was only trying to." Sasuke interrupted Naruto's explanation to suggest, "Have a peek to see what the scroll said? Are you really that reckless? Would you put your own curiosity before the good of the team? If so, you don't have what it takes to become a Chunin." Sakura added, "Baka," and gave the blonde boy a headshake. "It almost feels like I'm back in Narima," said the Ranma, the part of his mind. "Back there, I also had uncute tomboys jump to conclusions and hit me over the head." Unaware that he had neglected to object to Ranma's remark that Sakura was an ugly tomboy, Naruto yelled, "I wasn't going to open the Earth Scroll," and waved everyone away to give himself some breathing room. Sasuke raised a doubtful eyebrow and said, "Then how do you explain the scroll in your hand?" With a heated response, Naruto said, "This is a blank scroll. I was going to write down ideas." "What for?" The Ranma personality remarked, "There's no way they'll buy strategy and summary of resources." "That's not a bad idea. We should write down the techniques we wish to learn, techniques I want Kakashi-sensei to teach me. I've been slacking off a little since I became a genin. Besides, the Earth Scroll is still in my utility pouch." 5 minutes later, the four-person group was discovered jumping from tree branch to tree branch outside the camp. Naruto was still upset that no one had expressed regret for their error, but Kabuto had pointed out that it was time to depart because the smoke and odor of their food and fire would have drawn unwanted visitors. Naruto felt like he was being watched ever since they packed their belongings. Instead, he would have reacted with loud, screaming attacks, but the Ranma part of him had warned him of it and somehow controlled his reaction to a slight twitch of his hand. As instructed by his new self, Naruto was concentrating on their surroundings while the others talked about the test's remaining adversaries. Naruto was thankful that they were followed by 3 more people because it prevented them from sneaking up on him. However, he was unsure of how his new self calculated that number and their location. Naruto was so focused on tracking down their adversaries that he hardly noticed the others had halted on a big branch to prevent his momentum from tripping him up and sending him flying into the underbrush below. He had to use an instinctive tree walking technique on the branch. Kabuto said gravely, "We must be careful from here on out," as they gazed at the tower rising in the distance. If Naruto hadn't felt something move earlier, he would have asked for a synopsis of what they had been talking about. A kunai had been drawn and thrown by his hand before he could stop it. The sound was a wet crunch, and then the dull thud of metal buried in wood. The kunai was impaled through the head of a 20-meter-long centipede that had been climbing the tree behind them when the group turned around. Naruto muttered, "Damn, wasted a kunai on a stinkin' bug," with dismay. Kabuto said sharply, "Naruto-kun, to begin, I'd like us to avoid unnecessary actions and noises from here on. Moving through the forest like an elephant will only tip off our enemies, and they will not have a fun welcome party planned for us." Naruto hissed, "Hey, you're the ones making noise," in an attempt to reduce the volume of the noise. "I just killed a giant bug that was closing in on us. Do you think Sakura-chan would have been quiet if that thing had come close enough to touch her with its feelers? No, she'd have screamed." Aside from a perceived threat, Naruto really had no justification for throwing his kunai. The only reason it stopped Sakura from screaming and having a panic attack was while Kabuto was lecturing him. Regardless, sighed Kabuto, who didn't think Naruto's logic was all that flawed, "We need to move as slowly and safely as time allows." "Fine," huffed Naruto, but he sensed something settling over them as they began to walk. He could only sense that something was amiss, that it was getting harder to track the 3 enemies, as if they were being obscured by something. He questioned Kabuto suspiciously, "What's this?" which made the older teen hesitate for a moment. Feels like someone blanketed my senses with fake ones. Kabuto came to a complete stop and surveyed the area. Naruto had no idea what he was searching for, but the three adversaries all appeared tense. Kabuto brushed it off, "It's nothing," and leapt to the ground following the elder and more seasoned ninja. Naruto's teammates paid attention to him. Naruto was forced to follow suit, but he temporarily concealed his disappearance by using a rudimentary replacement technique in which he wrapped his jacket around a log. His Ranma personality encouraged him to start playing fairly since the opposition was. Naruto's group panicked as he crept slowly along the tree trunks toward the three enemies' hiding spots, and they realized that a log wearing his bright orange jacket had fallen to the ground in his place. The enemy was perplexed by this as well, but for some reason they were unable to locate him. He heard Ranma say, "The way of the sneaky thief. I discovered it a few years prior to my passing. It enables me to lose people's attention, making it extremely difficult for them to locate me unless they are trained to look for particular individuals based on their aura. Something I'm willing to wager neither the enemy nor my team are capable of. Heck, depending on how well I know someone, I can only tell them apart from others." I was a thief? When Naruto noticed a spectral image of an enemy hiding on a branch, he pondered. The young man was wearing a breathing mask over his face and a cream-colored bodysuit. A forehead protector bearing the rain symbol was placed over his forehead, and there was some kind of mask across his face, covering one eye. "Not really," Ranma clarified. "I could have been a great one if I tried, but it was just the name of the technique." Naruto crept closer and attempted to draw his kunai, but Ranma intervened. "No need," he said, and silently and swiftly made his hands fly out, striking multiple spots along the Rain Nin's spine. Ranma grumbled loudly inside as the ninja slumped to the branch in great pain and with a silent scream, while Naruto was awestruck by his skill. "I'm slow. Damn it. Before I passed away, I can recall delivering 200 punches in a second. Now, I can only muster 3, and we're incredibly careless with our accuracy. We're fortunate that I targeted wide areas of pressure points. Man, it's awful to die." Naruto also felt deceived by the knowledge of the past life skill, but he chose not to voice his displeasure. He still had 2 adversaries. But before he did, he saw that the breathing mask was about to come loose. "Should I?" "What?" Naruto asked. "Why not?" Ranma answered. "If he had the opportunity, he most likely would have taken something from us that he desired. While we're at it, check him for the Heaven Scroll." "Yes, why not?" Naruto concurred. He began searching through the Rain Nin's belongings and supplies because there wasn't much evidence to refute the voice in his head. The Rain Nin had lost all of his kunai and shuriken, the breathing mask, 1 utility pouch, some exploding notes, and soldier pills by the time Naruto slipped away. When he was getting supplies, they conveniently ran out of the good stuff and only had the cheap, inferior ninja tools. So Naruto was extremely satisfied because he had never been able to obtain high-quality items like the ones he had stolen. Furthermore, he had never required soldier pills or exploding notes, but they explained their application in the Ninja Academy, so he wasn't totally confused about their function. Approaching the second ninja was a little more challenging because he appeared suspicious of something, most likely the lack of appropriate reaction from his defeated teammate. It was a little more difficult to use the same technique against this one, and it took longer to position himself, but Naruto looked through his equipment to improve his own supply after the boy became paralyzed with pain. Most disappointingly, this one also lacked the Heaven Scroll. There was only one person left to carry the scroll, and there was a 50% chance that this team was carrying the Heaven Scroll. Hopefully, they were following his team because they needed the Earth Scroll and had heard that they had it back at the camp where he had initially noticed them. Contrary to popular belief, Naruto wasn't particularly intelligent, but he wasn't stupid either. He just decided to look at the bright side of things and hope that everything worked out. Finding the third ninja was quite challenging because he had undoubtedly realized that something was amiss. When Sakura disregarded Kabuto's counsel and demanded that Naruto allow the final Rain Nin to relinquish control over his presence, allowing Naruto's new self to pursue him, there was a brief moment of distraction. Naruto was motivated to try his hand at variety by a recollection from the survival test that Team 7 had been put through. Following some preparations, Naruto emerged behind the Rain Nin and shoved the startled boy, sending him hurtling over 100 meters to the ground. The Rain Nin had no choice but to brace for impact because they were unprepared for the abrupt descent, which would not do much when they landed headfirst from that altitude. Twang! The Rain Nin's momentum was stopped just inches before his face collided with the ground by a sudden jerk at his feet. The Rain Nin was pushed off the tree by Naruto, who let himself slide down the ninja wire he had tied around his feet. "Ha! You fell for it," he cried. He laughed and said, "You should have seen your face when you realized I was behind you." As he hit the ground with a thump, it was hilarious. The Rain Nin snarled through his breathing mask, emphasizing the word, lucky, as he struggled to break free from his bonds. You only got lucky, he said. Naruto, who was still smiling maniacally, gave an unconvincing, oops, before slipping his hand and using the kunai he happened to be holding to cut the wire. Unprepared for the force of gravity, the ninja landed on his head, leaving him vulnerable to an attack. Naruto took advantage of this by giving the Rain Nin a hard kick to the abdomen, which sent him crashing into a tree. Naruto was shocked as he looked down at his leg and questioned how he could have used so much force in his kick. The benefits of ki control, Ranma said. We have to rely on chakra for the time being because it improves strength and performance. Regretfully, I used up what little strength I had over the previous few days on sneaking and kicks in order to develop a reserve and control. We should really begin training. What makes chakra different from ki? Naruto pondered. Ranma repeated what Naruto had already heard multiple times. Chakra is a mix between body energy and spiritual energy. Since we use so much chakra in our daily training, I might add that we have surprisingly little of it. Nevertheless, we will soon accumulate our reserves, and hopefully, a more balanced blend of the two energies will improve our chakra control. Ki is pure spiritual energy. Sakura yelled, Naruto. Just before a fist struck the boy in question in the head. Where did you disappear to? Don't you know there are dangerous people around? With one hand rubbing his aching head and the other pointing at the unconscious Rain Nin, Naruto questioned, like that one? Wah! I got them all, Naruto exclaimed, forgetting the pain of Sakura's blow, and now it's time to restock my supplies. Before Sakura could object, Naruto was searching through the Rain Nin's pouches with an excited hum, and it was then that Sasuke and Kabuto appeared. Naruto laughed as he moved the aforementioned item from the enemy's utility pouch to his own. Great, I needed more wire, he exclaimed. He added, and here's the scroll. It's a heaven scroll, with a triumphant crow. Bonk. After demanding, quiet, do you want the whole world to know? Sakura grabbed the scroll out of Naruto's hands to confirm his assertion. Kabuto said, very good, Naruto-kun, while examining the fallen Rain Nin. Have you found the others? They don't matter, said Naruto dismissively. We've got the scrolls, and have enough time to get to the tower, so let's get moving and win this thing. The group finally reached their destination, the base of the tower situated in the precise center of the Forest of Death, after an hour of walking. Doors ran the length of the building, which from the outside appeared to be in some state of disrepair as a kind of seal. Many had notes with the team numbers of the teams taking the second section of the Chunin exam pasted on the middle. Others had been broken, indicating that the notes corresponding team was done. Fortunately, the group emerged right in front of the door that was assigned to Team 7 of Konoha. Sakura exclaimed, thank you for your assistance, Kabuto-kun, disregarding Naruto, who was offended by the suggestion that Kabuto had done more than he had. Kabuto had only warned them about the others and accompanied them. It's sad, but true, Ranma said. True geniuses are never recognized in their own time, and those who deserve praise rarely receive it. Huffing in offense at Sakura's words and deeds, Naruto broke the seals on the doors and went in, ignoring the silver-haired teenager who was bidding Sakura and Sasuke farewell as his own teammates gathered around him. When Sasuke and Sakura eventually made it inside, they discovered Naruto looking everywhere in the deserted room for any indication that someone had arrived to acknowledge their punctuality. Naruto inquired, where is he? Someone should have been here to meet us. Sasuke said, maybe they're busy, Dobi, we only broke the seal a few moments ago. Sakura cut in, hey, gesturing toward the center of the wall. Look at this. There was some sort of verse hanging on the wall. Naruto posed the direct question, what the hell does this mean? Sakura noted, there are some words missing. This is probably about the scrolls. I think we're supposed to open them. Sakura pulled out the Heaven Scroll and Naruto pulled out the Earth Scroll during a tense moment. Naruto and Sakura opened the scrolls almost simultaneously, tearing up a corner of each from where it was attached to the mass. The kanji for person appeared in the center of each scroll, encircled by multiple clusters of almost unintelligible squiggles that Naruto recognized from the Academy's scant discussion of summoning and sealing. When Ranma saw that there was a buildup of energy in the two scrolls, she and Sasuke ordered Naruto to put down the scroll and take a step back. Both Sakura and Naruto threw the scrolls away, and before the rolls of paper had even touched the ground, smoke began to rise from them in a way that was almost explosive. Where the scrolls had crossed paper with one another, a shadow emerged in the middle of the white smoke cloud. Naruto was immediately on high alert because he didn't want to be caught off guard in case this was another test. However, he was taken aback when a familiar face emerged from the fading smoke. Iruka-sensei. Naruto asked, bewildered to see his academy teacher in front of them. The man said, "Hey, Naruto," with a casual smile that made his cheeks tighten and the scar across his nose wrinkle. "Long time no see." Sakura, startled by the unexpected appearance of a familiar face, inquired, "What's going on?" Naruto scowled. This man, who had been like an older brother to him since graduating from the academy, was unknown to Ranma. If Ranma had chosen to disapprove of the man, this would have disturbed him, but he trusted Naruto's judgment in this instance and ignored the situation. Iruka-sensei explained, "It is set up so we Chunin meet up with the exam takers at the end of the second test, and took out what looked like a gold pocket watch. I was allowed to be the one who greeted you." Sakura asked, obviously perplexed by the situation, "Greet us?" Iruka looked at the watch and replied, "Looks like you made it in time. It's my pleasure to inform you that you have all passed the second test. Congratulations. To celebrate your successful completion of the second test, I would have liked to buy you all a round of ramen, but..." An ecstatic Naruto yelled, "We did it!" and embraced the scarred man around the waist. Naruto was ignoring Ranma at the moment, too excited to be concerned with anything but basking in the glory of victory and the expectation of a true ramen feast that was certain to ensue. Ranma had not felt comfortable with this action. "We passed. We did it. We did it." Nothing was going to ruin his moment of triumph. "First off," said an elderly man wisely, "congratulations on passing the second test." As the Sandaime Hokage stood in front of the teams that had passed, Naruto wasn't sure whether to yell out another whoop of joy or smile maniacally. He resorted to smiling and trembling with excitement, in part because of Ranma's influence. Their sensei, the examiners, and the Hokage were in front of the genin, who were arranged in 3 rows in a spacious hall with a balcony around the sides. A few meters above the ground, a massive statue of 2 hands forming the ram hand seal was positioned along the wall behind the adults. The examiner had fulfilled her promise to cut the passing group of 78 from the first exam in more than half, as there were 21 genin in total. A girl from Naruto's left squealed softly with delight. Sasuke-kun's team passed too. "Why does he appeal to girls so much?" "What?" Naruto asked. "Why do girls find that kind of thing attractive? He is moody, dark, and rarely speaks to anyone other than to insult or order them around." "You mean rather than pursuing a boisterous, vivacious boy who tries to get attention from others?" Ranma inquired, although there was a trace of sarcasm in his tone. Naruto was too nervous to answer for fear of losing his temper if he was insulted. Ranma felt a shiver for no apparent reason. Even to himself it was almost like the intent of a murderer, but without any animosity or malice. Naruto heard Sasuke whisper into his sleeve, "Something doesn't feel right," as he used it to wipe the dirt from his face. "As far as I could recall, the second examin's name was Anko? Hokage-sama will now explain the third test." She exclaimed. Her entrance was simply unforgettable, so listen carefully. Before taking his pipe out of his mouth, the elderly man stepped forward and gave it one last puff. "Before I explain the third test, there is something I'd like to share, something I'd like you to know," the man murmured. "This concerns the true purpose of the exams." All the genins appeared perplexed. "Isn't turning us into Chunin the real goal?" "What?" Naruto asked. Before the thought could completely take over his mind, Ranma said, "Focus, and we might hear something interesting." The Sandaime went on, "Why do all the allied countries take the exam together? To promote friendship among the countries, to raise the level of shinobi. I don't want any of you to get confused about the true meaning. This exam is a replacement for war among the allied countries." Naruto was unsure of the source of the question, but it echoed his own unsaid one. "What?" "If you go back a while in history, you'd find that the allied countries were enemies who fought each other over who would rule," the Hokage said. "In order to prevent wasteful fighting, the countries chose the Chunin selection exams as a proper setting to vent our aggression." Ranma was able to detect Naruto's intention to scream out a question about whether or not this was about becoming Chunin, and he managed to control it to a strangled growl. "The fact of the matter is, this exam decides which ninja has the potential to become Chunin," Sandaime went on. "However, the exam serves a second purpose. Each country's ninja will risk their lives to defend the prestige of their country. Leaders and influential individuals from various nations, who comprise the shinobi's clientele, will attend the third exam to observe each of your battles. If one nation demonstrates greater strength than the others, that nation will gain more clients. If a nation appears weak, they will lose clients. It will also send a political message to other countries. This is the power of our village." "Yes, but why must we risk our lives in combat?" A tense moment of silence ensued after the beast-like Kiba growled loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The village's strength is the country's strength," the Hokage clarified, adding that, The village's strength is the shinobi's strength, and a shinobi's true strength is only born through life-risking battle. This exam is to show off our own strength and to show off other countries' strength. The only reason it matters is that lives are on the line, which is why those who came before you fought in the Chunin exam. Another girl from the Leaf ranks interrupted, saying, "But, why did you say all that about it being for friendship?" I said that to begin with, the elderly man acknowledged, so as not to confuse the goal of this test in the shinobi world. Friendship takes the form of balancing and losing one's life, but before we begin the third exam, there is one more thing to realize. This is not merely a test. It is a battle to the death, with your aspirations and the honor of your nation at stake. "I see," murmured Ranma, as Naruto confidently said, "I understand." The red-haired child said icily, "I don't care about this, just tell us what this mortal combat entails." I'd like to explain the third test, but between the genin and the other ninja in the room, a sickly-looking man who was coughing and had heavy bags under his eyes, resembling someone named Gosunkugi, said, actually, bowing to the oldest of them, "I apologize, Hokage-sama, but from now on, as the referee, will you allow me, Gekko Hayate?" "By all means," the elderly gentleman concurred. After making a respectful bow, the man stood up and turned to face the Chunin candidates. "Hayate," he said, coughing, "there is something I'd like you to do before the third test." He was interrupted by another coughing fit, which gave the genin time to wonder how this man could be a ninja. Naruto tried to argue with Ranma in his head, but he saw that despite his illness, the man was acting weaker than he actually was. A ninja's best tools are deceit and lies. Hayate concluded, "A preliminary for the third test, to decide who will participate in the main event." "Preliminary?" Shikamaru demanded in near outrage, a feeling reflected on nearly all the genin. After all, they had already passed the first test, and nearly gotten themselves killed in the second, with varying times to recover ranging from a little over 4 days to mere minutes. "What do you mean?" "Sensei," Sakura said humbly, lacking the confidence she had previously displayed, "why can't we all take the third test?" The new examiner turns to the pink-haired girl, groaning uneasily to suppress a cough, "Because the first 2 tests must have been too easy this time," he replied. "There are too many of you left, so the rules state that we must hold a preliminary in order to reduce the number of participants. The third test will be watched by a large number of guests, and the fights may drag on for too long. As Hokage-sama mentioned, our time is limited. Anyone who can't fight, or feel they've had enough should forfeit now so we can get on with it." "Now?" roared a disbelieving Kiba beside Naruto. Naruto observes everyone for a moment, repeating to himself in his mind that he wasn't going to give up after reaching that point. Kabuto sheepishly announced, I'm going to quit," attracting the attention of everyone around him. Hayate confirmed, "Yakushi Kabuto-kun of the Leaf," from his list and coughed again. "You may leave. Does anyone else want to retire? From now on it will be one-on-one battles. Raise your hand if you don't feel up to it." "Coward," Ranma said, controlling Naruto's snarling instead of his obnoxious and ugly outburst in which he would have demanded to know why the older boy had given up. The silver-haired genin apologized, "I'm sorry, Naruto-kun," as if he had expected to disappoint him in some way. "But my body is all beat up, and I haven't actually been able to hear out of my left ear since I was attacked by the sound nin in the first test, and now we have to risk our lives. I just..." Kabuto shook his head and lowered his head as he left the crowd, feigning fear and shame. Ranma was not duped and told Naruto that the boy had enough energy for one more battle, and the boy was incredibly self-assured and content for someone who had just given up on becoming Chunin for another 6 months. The boy gave Naruto an awkward wave before continuing on his way after having a brief meeting with his teammates. Ranma noticed that Sasuke's mark on his neck became more active when Kabuto was not in view, and the boy made a pained grimace as he lifted a hand to clasp the spot, and Uchiha last believed he could keep this from him. "No one else?" coughed Hayate. Naruto heard Sakura urge Sasuke to give up before the mark affected him too much, but he didn't bother to hear the details. If Sasuke hadn't stopped her hand from rising and instructed her not to, she would have quit or told the examiner. A quick, silent argument broke out among the Junin, who must have witnessed the exchange, but nothing was done. Hayate declared, "Then let's begin the preliminaries," when no one else offered to depart. "This preliminary will consist of one-on-one fighting. You will essentially be fighting as though this was a real-life confrontation." There was silence long enough for the genin to comprehend what was happening. "Since we have exactly 20 participants, we will have 10 matches, Hayate said. "The third test is where the winners advance. There aren't any regulations until someone dies, loses consciousness, or surrenders. The battle will go on. If you don't feel like dying, I advise you to surrender, but once I've decided who is the winner, I'll intervene and put an end to the fight because we wouldn't want needlessly to increase the number of corpses, would we? A board with a scoreboard rotated out of the way above the big statue of the pair of arms, saying, to decide on the matchups for each battle, we will use this, now, to decide on the first matchup. As the lights on the electronic board began to blink, the tension was almost palpable. Sasuke Uchiha versus Yoroi Ikado as those who were not supposed to fight made their way to the upper level where they could safely watch the battle, Ranma remarked. This can't be a coincidence. They must have rigged it so Sasuke would be among the first to leave after fighting first after they argued about him. Hayate moved between Sasuke and the older boy in the mask a short while after everyone had settled down against the metal railguard along the upper level. Please begin, said Hayate while Ranma continuously commented on their abilities and errors. Naruto watched the battle below them with great interest. The masked guy is charging something, but it looks like Hanako's draining technique without a hoop, too flashy. He should have just sidestepped those shuriken. His mark is acting up again. Very nice, almost smashed Sasuke's skull in with that one. Oh, hurry up. What is causing Sasuke to clutch his ribs when that was hardly a love tap? Put it behind you and continue fighting. Don't let him come up with a plan, you brooding fool. He truly deserved that one. In fact, he was begging for it by simply lying there rather than attempting to get better. Alright, so that guy got arrogant and didn't pay attention to Sasuke's legs. That was a great kick for someone who was exhausted, but I could have done better. What do they do? Is this a tea party or a fight? Damn it, throw some punches. It reminds me of what we witnessed Lee do to him previously. The bastard stole Fuzzy Brow's technique. He hardly made any changes. Well, that's a little different. Sasuke must have altered the part where Lee used bandages to bind his opponent because he doesn't have any and has never seen the attack end. Nice finish, though, as he used gravity to increase the damage that his kick caused. I'm willing to wager that the man in the mask has at least a few cracked ribs, vertebrae, and skull plates. I'm stopping the fight here, Hayate said as soon as he looked at Yoroi's vital signs. The winner of the first fight, and candidate for the third test, Uchiha Sasuke. What that red-headed guy is looking at that, freaky, wouldn't want to face him in a dark alley under the influence of a moxibustion point while being hogtied by irate fiancés for looking at some girl the wrong way, and that sound instructor almost feels sexually aroused. Not a good thing when he's watching two guys fight. Better stay away from that pervert. Medic Nin was strapping down Sasuke's opponent for his own safety as he carried him on a stretcher. Hayate moved back into the center after Sasuke and Kakashi vanished. After clearing his throat, the Junin declared, "We will now start the next match." Before the available letters came to rest, the electronic scoreboard flashed to life and cycled through them. Aburame Shino versus Zaku Abumi when both of his arms are in slings. Why is that guy going out to fight? Ranma wondered what was going through Naruto's mind. Maybe he's stubborn, Naruto said, squinting at the two opponents. Sakura said, "What was that, Naruto?" "Nothing," Naruto said with a laugh and a shamed smile while massaging the back of his head. "Just thinking out loud." Without bothering to comment on their attempt to keep their conversation private, Ranma went on, "That guy really needs to have something up his sleeve if he's planning on fighting." "Even without using our arms, we would continue," Naruto said. "That's not the same," Ranma countered. "We can take more of a beating because we have the strength and endurance to support it. But we need to improve our skills a little bit. We also heal much faster than average people, so the guy can barely." "Hey, he's pulling an arm out of the sling. How did he get that blast so fast? That hit didn't seem to have any power behind it. Are those insects scuttling from Shino's cheek hole? Their qualities are interesting. They're cool even though I wouldn't want to have that skill in a million years. What a flanking move with a bug army. Although he doesn't appear to be very strong, this guy is a strategist." Yes, he was cunning and could use both arms now that he has a single weapon pointed at both sides. What are those objects in his palms? Bamf. Oh no, that must have hurt. In a twin blast, losing one arm while barely keeping the other attached demonstrates that you must rely on your body first, technology second. Hayate coughed after assessing the demolished sound Nin where Shino had knocked him down. "It seems it's over," he said. With his hand on his stomach and his dislocated forearm, Zaku was taken away on a stretcher after suffering such a serious injury. That man could never possibly return to his life as a ninja. Hayate was able to say, "Winner, Aburame Shino," without clearing his throat or coughing. Sakura muttered in amazement, "I always thought he was creepy, but he's strong." Hayate said, I think we should go on to the next match," and then coughed. Naruto quickly reached into his pouch, retrieved a kunai, and swung it to confront the unexpected figure behind them. "Hey," Kakashi said nonchalantly as he used one of his own hands to stop Naruto's. Feeling a bit twitchy, "Eh, Naruto?" Naruto yelled, "Your own damn fault for sneaking up on me." Before Ranma could intervene, both Ranma and Naruto would have attacked as a reflex in the given situation, but that didn't mean they had to enjoy it. A concerned Sakura demanded, "What do you mean? Hey, how is Sasuke-san? Is he alright?" "He's fine," acknowledged Kakashi. However, Ranma told Naruto that he was concealing something. "He's sleeping in a hospital bed." Just as two unfamiliar names appeared on the scoreboard, Sakura let out a sigh of relief. The ongoing battle piqued Ranma's interest. One of the two, the Leaf Nin, who was also wearing a veil-like mask, coiled himself around his opponent like a python to drain his life, bending his limbs almost as if they were boneless. When the opponent was revealed to be a puppet, the roles were swiftly reversed. The puppet master had been concealed in the bandage bundle the puppet had been carrying around and had been disregarded as irrelevant. The puppet returned the favor of squeezing the life out of the Leaf Nin's body by trapping him with extra limbs and superior strength, and the Leaf Nin barely managed to wheeze out a cry of surrender. Hayate exclaimed, "Winner, Conqueror," before coughing once more. Naruto pondered, "I thought this was a one-on-one battle." "That's just a puppet, Naruto," asserted Kakashi. Sakura added, "It's a tool, just like a shuriken or kunai, using chakra to control it. Puppet no jutsu, to elaborate." Kakashi interrupted, tapping Sakura on the shoulder and pointing to the scoreboard, where Sakura's name and Yamanaka Ino's were illuminated. "But now is not the time for lectures," he said. Sakura and Ino sat down, staring at each other intently as the medic Nin removed the injured Leaf Nin. All of the recently graduated genin from Konoha were aware that the two were Sasuke's fiercest rivals for his affections, and their rivalry appeared to have persisted ever since they last met prior to the tests. The forehead protectors were put in their proper positions after a few words were exchanged, which appeared to be the signal for their battle to begin. Sakura took her hite-8 from where it served as a hair accessory, and Ino took hers from her hip. "A simple bunshin. Come on?" Ranma let out a moan. After the Akado, "I see it was a trick. Speed boost to catch the blonde off guard with a blow to the face. Not bad. Did Sakura learn any new techniques?" "Stop chatting and start fighting. That is simply pitiful. They both possess the same level of academy-taught taijutsu knowledge and are adept at fending off attacks of the style. Look, their attacks were blocked by one another. Is there a double knockout going on? Actually, they're getting back up 10 minutes already. Furthermore, not one of them has displayed any dominance at all. Show us something new, please." "Okay, I'll admit that it's novel to chop off your own hair to make a point in combat, so why are they just standing there? If what they say down there is true, is there energy flowing along the hairs on the ground? Ah, special technique. Slow one. A trap out of her hair. Cool." Sakura is now unable to evade the unique method. "Mind control? Well, I never considered that. What comes next?" "Get on with it," Naruto shouted, echoing Ranma's tone of criticism. Sakura suddenly froze, clutching her head as Hayate asked, "What is it? Do you want to forfeit?" "Like hell I will," the girl with the pink hair cried, almost furiously. Sakura's hands made a seal that made both girls move in what appeared to be jerky, desperate movements. Following some gasping and staring, the two Kunoichi scurried to their feet and charged at one another, determined to complete the battle. "Double knockout," said Ranma. "They are both equally strong and skilled. Just as I had assumed. However, they ought to have tied their forehead protectors more securely." Hayate declared, "Both fighters are unable to continue. The fourth preliminary match has no winner." The two were lifted by their respective team leaders, who then leapt back up to the upper level and leaned them against the wall. Surprisingly, beneath the grit and bruises, they both appeared to be happy faces. Ino's Junin instructor remarked, "They don't even seem to need medical attention, while smoking a cigarette. They should wake up in about half an hour." After being assured that everything would be alright, Naruto ignored them and turned his attention to the scoreboard, where he saw yet another pair of unfamiliar names. 10-10 of the Leaf versus Tamari of the Sand. As he and Naruto watched them enter the ring, Ranma remarked, "Not bad. Definitely not bad. They both worked hard to train in ways other than the typical ones. However, they're weapon users." "How did you find out all of that?" Squinting to get a better look at what Ranma was reportedly seeing, Naruto had the opportunity to inquire. "Easy," said Ranma, almost laughing. "The calluses on their hands show wear on the palm and fingers, which is typical of either weapon users or grunt workers in farming or construction. Their gait practically begs for intensive training. They rely on weapons because of their line of work, and Blondie's presence there is obvious due to the fact that she is a huge battle fan." Begin. As the fight ended almost before it started, with 10-10 unconscious in what must have been an extremely uncomfortable position on the battle fan, Ranma remarked, "Whoa, that's almost as fast as I was with my chestnut fist." A variety of weapons, most of them sharp and thrown, were scattered around the two. Unlike Moose, who had drawn her weapons from inside his bulky garments, 10-10 had called them out with a scroll. She hadn't benefited much from that trick, as Tamari had blocked or repelled the barrage of weapons with her fan before knocking the leaf nin into the air and landing on her back on the folded battle fan, bruised and unconscious. Hayate yelled, "Winner of the 5th match, Tamari of the Sand." "She's working on something." The triumphant girls smirked as Ranma cautioned Naruto. As Tamari tossed the unconscious girl away like a bag of trash, Lee also noticed and vanished next to Ranma and Naruto. If the girl hadn't been ready for that possibility and had blocked her fan, Lee would have caught her and nearly attacked the person who had insulted his teammate. The Junin, who resembled an adult Lee, yelled, "Lee, stop," or perhaps it was the other way around. Tamari, the red-headed sand nin from the higher levels, said coolly, but everyone could hear, "You've been declared the winner. Stop wasting time with that pathetic guardian and get up here." The conversation that ensued was typical, warning that he was stronger than he looked and that he should be ready, etc. However, Ranma made the decision to declare that they needed to acquire better weapons to specialize in. Kunai and shuriken were fine, but they were disposable and could be used against the previous owner since weapons were essential in this world. Ranma insisted that they see a weaponsmith right away because he had some ideas about what they could acquire. "Don't lose to those guys, Naruto." Sakura yelled abruptly beside him. Either the smoking guy couldn't tell the time, or more time had gone by since she'd gone unconscious. "Okay," Naruto said, becoming a little excited in spite of Ranma's advice not to expend all of his energy prior to the fight. She also said, "Thanks for earlier. If you hadn't yelled back there, I would have lost." Naruto said, "Yep," as Ranma shook his head. That was a trap, one he had probably stepped into many times, but at least he had learned to spot them. Sakura's mood abruptly reverted, confirming his theory. Comparing Kintsuchi and Nara Shikamaru, Naruto groaned impatiently, "Ma, lazy guy's turn." As both fighters slouched as they approached the middle, Ranma warned, "Just because he's lazy doesn't mean he's no good. I have to admit that my dad was very good, even though he was lazy all his life. By the time I was 18, I could beat him 7 times out of 10, and I made sure he couldn't fight dirty. He has more going on than he displays. Just take a look at those analytical eyes." Then Ino, who had also recovered from her battle, called out, "Don't lose, Shikamaru. Begin." "He's using his chakra to extend his shadows, isn't that cool?" Ranma remarked. "However, what benefit does it offer? She is avoiding the shadow, but why? It's a little outdated, but it's a good trick. She's modified it by attaching wire to the needles and shaking them rather than throwing new ones, which distracted Shikamaru and allowed her to attack him when he's distracted. Oh, she's throwing around senbon with bells on them. I remember that she eventually removed the bell from one needle, making it difficult to detect. That's what the shadow does. Then it's neat, but it must take a lot of energy to maintain." "All right, Naruto. Keep in mind to always pay attention to your surroundings, otherwise, we might end up like that chick, with a severe concussion at best." As it concluded, Hayate called, "Now, the next match," and glanced at the scoreboard. Uzumaki Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba. In a triumphant cry, Naruto exclaimed, "It's about time," to Ranma's dismay. With a puppy peeking out of his jacket, Naruto strode across Kiba to his place with assurance. It appeared that Kiba shared Naruto's enthusiasm for the match. The boy yelled, "It's like we've already won, lucky, eh, Akamaru?" he said to his puppy, who responded with a joyful bark. Ranma forced Naruto to respond, "Don't count your chickens until they hatch," rather than breaking into a fit of rage and snapping. "And if you don't want your puppy to get hurt, you shouldn't bring him into a fight." "Idiot!" Kiba exclaimed, removing Akamaru's jacket and setting him down on the floor. "It seems that he misinterpreted the warning. Akamaru's fighting with me." "Animals and bugs are the same as tools," Hayate affirmed. "It is allowed." "Fine," huffed Naruto, "if you feel you need the help." "Ha," Kiba chuckled, but Naruto's remarks were poignant. "Quit acting so tough, Akamaru. You stay out of it, I'll fight him alone." From the higher levels, Sakura yelled, "Don't lose to him, Naruto." "I feel bad for you," Kiba added after giving it some very little thought, "so I'll beat you with one punch." With a tone that would have been cool but for his childish voice, Ranma made Naruto grouse as he said, "Do your best." Hayate interrupted, "Then begin," before the altercation could turn into a full-on shouting match. Kiba instantly knelt on the ground and used his hands to perform the ram seal. Shikaku number Jutsu. Ranma could almost feel the energy building, and both she and Naruto noticed Kiba's changes. His hands developed claws in place of nails, and his face became more savage, though that might just be his typical battle face. Ranma could see what Kiba was going to do next, but Naruto was not trained to react as quickly. As a result, when Kiba suddenly appeared in front of them, ramming his elbow and shoulder into their abdomen, all Ranma could force Naruto to do was raise his knee a bit more than momentum should have allowed, landing a quick blow beneath Kiba's poorly protected face and sending them both into the air. However, Kiba barely made it off the ground before landing on his feet, and Naruto gained distance. While Kiba landed on his feet and rubbed his aching chin, where a bruise was already starting to form, Naruto struck the ground close to the wall, actually cracking the solid stone. Kiba smugly told Hayate he won't be waking up for a while, and then he stood up to triumphantly address the crowds, who had been taken aback by how swiftly this had come to an end. "We won't let that love tap depress us, will we?" Ranma said, more than she was asked. As Naruto slowly stood up, a smile twitched his lips. It had been a hard blow. The entire ninja game was about deceit, so if Kiba believed he would defeat an injured opponent, he would have to maintain that ruse until he realized the injuries weren't as bad as initially believed. It wasn't as hard as Zabuza's clone had hit, but it was a little harder than Sakura usually hit him when he irritated her. With a purposeful slur in his voice, Naruto demanded, "S that th, best why, got? Stop acting so tough, you're bleeding," Kiba responded. Naruto smiled and said, "I let you hit me." This was not totally accurate, but being a ninja involves lying after all. He consistently put on a brave front even though people thought he was a total moron for repeatedly failing the genin exams. To test your strength, you should take your own advice and not act touch. Use your dog if you feel you need the help. "I'll make you regret that," Kiba said. "Akamaru, let's go." As he and his dog ran in Naruto's direction, the feral boy reached into his hip pouch. When Naruto could see his hand again, he saw that it contained 2 smoke balls. "Bamf! Get down!" Ranma gave the order, and Naruto fell to the ground to feel the air move in the smoke above him, as if he hadn't done it himself. Leap. Following Ranma's instructions, Naruto leapt into the air as something passed beneath him. His head briefly emerged from the smoke to reveal a puppy waiting outside. Duck and sweep. As directed, Naruto squatted down and swept his leg in a half circle as he landed. He enjoyed the sound of someone falling to the ground and felt Kiba's shins hitting his own. As he felt Kiba roll to his feet, Ranma said, "All right, there's only one way to finish this. Be sure to adhere strictly to my instructions. Expel all of our smoke balls and set them off so that everything is covered." Naruto reached into his newly refilled hip pouch and took out a handful of smoke balls, which he transferred to his other hand. As he reached in for the last of them, he then tossed them randomly, filling the room and upper levels with smoke, without arguing with Ranma because he had not yet led him astray. Since the battle was typically limited to the lower level, it makes sense that everyone was a little uneasy when they were covered in smoke. Kiba taunted, "It's no use, Naruto. My sense of smell is 1,000 times more sensitive than a human's. I don't need to see you to get you." Chink. Twang. Ka chink. Twang. 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 Chink. Twang. The arrogant words, "I wouldn't move if I were you," came out of Naruto's mouth. A lot of his loudness was gone, but it was still the same smugness he usually displayed after pulling a great prank. At that moment, his theme music would have reached a delightful crescendo if he had had it. "You might set something off." As soon as the smokescreen began to thin, onlookers saw that a number of kunai had been affixed to the walls at ostensibly arbitrary heights and intervals. Because of his bright blonde hair and screaming orange jumpsuit, Naruto was the first fighter to be seen. He was standing with his arms crossed and a kunai in one hand. Shortly after, Kiba was also seen, and he was encircled by familiar strips of paper. Explosive notes. These were fastened to almost imperceptible ninja wire, which had been fastened to the kunai that were stuck in the walls, entangling the wild boy in a tight explosive web. "Give up? Like hell I will. Akamaru," Naruto gloated, "he's indisposed at the moment." And as the smoke cleared from the room's last corners, a second Naruto was seen clutching a muzzled, hog-tied puppy. "Do you give up?" Hayate coughed from the sidelines, "If you do not, or can't get out of there, I will declare you incapable of continuing." Kiba snarled grudgingly and conceded defeat. Naruto exclaimed, "Cool," and began tugging at the wires. "I won. Now to get back my supplies." "No. You'll set them off, everyone, Especially Kiba, who appeared to be about ready to soil himself, cringed and braced for a huge explosion as several kunai came loose from the walls. The kunai fell to the ground without incident, and Naruto drew them back to him as if fishing, dragging the wire in and removing the explosive notes as if they were inconsequential or unimportant. Naruto mockingly remarked, "Hey, fooled you." When he saw their shocked looks, You really think I'd set off that many explosive notes indoors while I was still here? These were just dummy notes I made and attached while waiting for the smoke to clear. I'm saving the real ones for later." To the startled and somewhat incredulous audience, Hayate declared, winner of the 5th preliminary match, Uzumaki Naruto. As he marched up to the higher levels, Naruto was in a great mood. He had just defeated Kiba, proving to his peers that he wasn't as far behind them as they had assumed. The look on Kiba's face when he believed he was going to be blown to pieces was worth the dull sting, even though he had obviously been a little careless when he was removing the kunai from the wires and had received a few cuts. Naruto-kun," said a timid voice that was almost unheard. Naruto halted and turned to face Hyuga Hinata. She spoke to him while holding something in her hand because she was frightened to meet his eyes. With trepidation, the girl extended her hands and showed him a tiny jar. With caution, Naruto questioned, "What's this?" It wasn't overly paranoid to expect retaliation because he had just defeated her teammate. "Medical cream," said a red-eyed woman behind him, nicely endowed the Junin instructor of the girl. "For me?" inquired Naruto. "Why doesn't she speak independently?" Ranma pondered. "Just take it, Naruto," the Junin recommended. Sure," Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly. He wasn't accustomed to receiving gifts from others. "Thanks. That was really nice of you, Hinata." Only Ranma saw the girl's intense flush because Naruto was too preoccupied with the idea of receiving something without cause. Although Ranma didn't say it, he recognized that expression and had experienced it once or twice when his fiancés weren't present. Hinata fell deeply in love with them. What was the duration of that? Naruto remarked, "Wow, this works well," pointing out to Ranma that the cuts on their hands were healing with a hissing sound as he applied the cream. "This is great medicine." "Next match," exclaimed Hayate, Hyuga Neji versus Hyuga Hinata. After witnessing her teammate's humiliation, Hinata hesitantly approached Hayate, who was standing across from a long-haired man with eyes that resembled hers. Ranma was reading the contestants as best he could while a discussion about Hinata and Neji's relationship was going on around them. Neji's scowl and posture made it obvious that he detested Hinata. Hinata was uncomfortable having to fight her cousin because she did not feel the same way. A lack of confidence in her own abilities and a low sense of self-worth were also evident in her posture. Hayate called out, "Begin," and moved aside. This fight did not get off to a good start like most of the others. Neji tried his hardest to persuade Hinata to give up by using psychological tricks to erode her already brittle self-esteem. Both Ranma and Naruto grew increasingly irate as this continued. This was not the right thing for that bastard to do. Furthermore, his theory and opinion were incorrect. Individuals can evolve. When it was finally too much to contain, Naruto burst out. He said, "Shut up, Teme." Ranma struggled to control the surge of power she felt. "Just because you can't, doesn't give you the right to stop others from changing. Get your head out of your ass and get on with letting Hinata-chan beat some sense into you." Hinata appeared to have been emboldened by Naruto's speech because, after taking a moment to think, she used the Byakugan, a family ability, and slid into a fluid defensive battle stance. The fight was on, and the blood vessels surrounding the fighter's eyes clenched and protruded beneath the skin. "With the exception of me, these have to be the most proficient hand-to-hand fighters to date," Ranma remarked. "If my memory serves me correctly, they have a smooth style, quick movements, accurate strikes and blocks, pressure points, and acupuncture points. If they land a hit, it's very damaging. If you know where to hit, it's easy to replicate, but those eyes look almost unnatural, especially now that all those veins are showing." "You nearly had him, Hinata, so close one. If she had, what would have happened?" Naruto couldn't stop wondering. "She was targeting a group of nerves that regulate breathing," Ranma explained. "Given what we know about her, she wouldn't kill a relative unless it was absolutely necessary, the qualities of a good leader, but if she had hit him correctly, she would have seized his breathing for a moment, which would have been long enough to incapacitate him or kill him." "Was there anything that she struck?" As the two Hyuga circled one another, exchanging blows and blocking each other's, Naruto asked hastily. Ranma acknowledged, "I seem to remember a nerve that would shut down the kidneys for a second, but I didn't bother remembering it because it wasn't necessary for combat or first aid." As the two battled, energy almost followed every move. Ranma and Naruto discovered more about the Byakugan than they had previously realized. By listening to the conversation around them, it appeared to be very helpful for observing pressure points, acupuncture points, general nerve clusters, and energy flow. By introducing a pulse of their own chakra into the opponent's system, the Hyuga were able to disrupt the flow through specific clusters and disable organs, limbs, or the control of chakra. We definitely need some sort of primary weapon if we're going to face people like that, Ranma confirmed in his previous statement. Naruto's response was interrupted by Ranma's internal. No, the blonde got a headache from that. Her heart has been struck and is beating erratically. When Naruto complained, he clarified. Neji knocked down the injured girl by pushing her back. Hinata stood up again, trembling, bleeding, perspiring, and gasping for air despite the agony she must be experiencing. However, after looking up at them, her shaking subsided, but Ranma knew that unless someone intervened, she was 10 minutes away from death. She doubled over and coughed up blood that splattered onto the floor before she could even take another step. Naruto and Ranma were both trembling with anger at Neji for causing such harm to their families. However, Hinata didn't appear to be willing to give up until she was dead, so Naruto was unable to refrain from urging her on. Hinata hurried back into battle with her cousin, who had only minor injuries, after the show of support seemed to have some effect. Hinata suffered a backhand that sent her tumbling back a step after being struck in the liver. The girl went back to fight, ignoring her pain, but was defeated by a blow to the solar plexus from the palm heel. Hinata began gradually pushing herself to a hunched standing position just as the judge was ready to announce Neji the winner. Despite having a limp arm, she was holding her side and was determined not to appear weak. After his taunts went unanswered or unreacted to, Neji lost his temper and stormed in. There was a moment when Naruto was on the upper levels and noticed that Neji's muscles were tensing. He blinked and found himself between Neji and Hinata, Hinata's sensei kneeling with a grip on Neji's other arm, Hayate standing next to him with his finger tapping Neji's forehead protector, Kakashi standing closer with a grip on the boy's extended arm, and Guy standing behind Neji with a grip around his neck. Everyone appeared to be just as shocked as Naruto to see him there, but he was unable to express his perplexity before Hinata's wounds overcame her and caused her to collapse to the ground in a violent fit of coughing. As he assisted the girl in lying on her back, Ranma moved his hand over her ribs and temporarily pushed Naruto's control aside. The faint flicker of his fingers moving more quickly than usual, pressing a few points that made the almost unconscious Hinata breathe easier, would have gone unnoticed if Naruto had lost his sense of touch. Assuring her, "Don't worry, Hinata-chan," Naruto thought it was strange to hear and feel himself talk without really speaking. "You'll be okay, promise." Hinata gave a small smile before closing her eyes. Ranma almost vanished entirely when Naruto regained control, leaving Naruto worn out. He moved aside to give the medic Nin access to the girl, who was now unconscious, and she was taken out faster than any of the other wounded fighters. Hey, Neji, who was overconfident, called, "Loser if you're trying to be a shinobi," then cut out that annoying habit of cheering for others. In the end, a loser is a loser. They cannot change. "You're wrong," snarled Naruto. "People can change if they want to." Lee blocked his path as he took a step closer. "Naruto-kun, please calm yourself. Save the fighting for the matches. If he faces either of us in the third test, we will prove to him that hard work can enable a loser to defeat the elite." "Fine," Naruto snarled. He saw a pool of Hinata's blood while looking around to keep himself from getting even more angry. Using every tactic at his disposal, he suppressed his feelings and marched over to the pool. He reached it and slid his hand through it until his fingers were dripping. There was a lot of. Naruto lifted his bloodied hand and clenched it into a fist, aiming it at the male Hyuga. "The grimly, I'm gonna take you down," he vowed. Naruto didn't care that Neji didn't seem to take him seriously because he had been warned. Wandering up the stairs back to the upper levels, Sandaime Hokage, in his own spot on the upper levels, gazed thoughtfully upon the outcast of Konoha. "It seems 5 days in the forest has improved Naruto-kun's skills more than we thought," he thought. Iruka interrupted, "I beg your pardon, Hokage-sama, but Naruto couldn't have gotten good enough to teleport down there that fast. Even with his vast reserves, what he did looked more like what Guy did, purely physical." "Indeed," replied the elderly gentleman, "and he seems more restrained and mature than before entering this exam." "You don't think?" "No, I do not," said the Sandaime. "We would have been able to feel it if that had been the case." "Then what?" "According to reports, Orochimaru was in the area, and might still be. So Naruto-kun could be possessed. Not in this case, but their team did run into him, and my wayward student appeared when Kakashi was sealing the mark he left on Uchiha Sasuke. The boy mentioned he had been acting strange since the encounter. Sarutobi went on. But his sudden leap in speed isn't what troubles me about our resident prankster. What is it, Hokage-sama? While he was apparently checking for broken ribs, young Hinata started breathing easier. I don't understand. I've seen the Hyuga perform healing and fighting techniques for a long time, and what I just saw resembled this somewhat. That he knows some of their secrets would mean one of two things. He has been injured enough in his lifetime to know where to press in order to alleviate pain, or what, Hokage-sama? Or he snuck into the Hyuga compound and copied their technique and medical scrolls. Iruka objected, saying, but only those with the Byakugan can see them, and Naruto doesn't have those eyes. The Tenketsu are still there whether the Byakugan is in use or not, Sandaime thought. Only extensive use of the Tenketsu would allow someone to easily find them without using the Hyuga gift. Iruka concluded. Hiyashi-san will not be pleased to hear this, as he turned to face Naruto as he left a furious Sand Nin dressed in Kobuki. Precisely, concluded Sandaime Hokage, so it would be in Naruto's best interest not to tell him. Perhaps he will reveal it in time, and be accepted by the Hyuga, but at the moment, it is more likely that they will attempt to assassinate him and take him apart to learn how he found out their secrets. As the boy emerged on the ground in a whirlpool of sand for his fight with Lee, Ranma remarked, there's something really wrong with that redhead. He seems a little odd, Naruto concurred, who gets love tattooed in red ink on their forehead. That's not it, Ranma countered. He has an extremely disturbed and unnatural aura. It seems like an Oni is being kept in place by a failing spirit ward. You've fought Oni, Ni-san? In wonder, Naruto inquired. Ranma disregarded the well-known illusion. A demigod Phoenix King was the worst I've ever faced, he boasted. Of course I won. Wow. Was all Naruto could manage to say in his head. However, why did you take over my body? I apologize, but you wouldn't have reacted quickly enough if I had been shouting directions at you, Ranma said. Wow. Lee moves so quickly. That sand is not natural, it's reacting to this Gaara as if it has a mind of its own or can read his thoughts. That guy is more adept at handling sand than Haku was at handling ice, Naruto added his voice, and please, the next time you take over, at least warn me. Guy yelled. Lee! Take them off! Lee had retreated to the tips of the statue's fingers to catch his breath following a string of unsuccessful attacks. But Guy-sensei, that's only for protecting many precious people, isn't it? Lee answered the phone. With confidence, Guy exclaimed, it's okay, and held out his fist, thumb upward, I'll allow it. Those things weigh nearly as much as Ryuga's umbrella, Ranma remarked thoughtfully. Lee or Guy should tell us where they got them. Lee. Go. Guy said. Even with the key senses he loved to use so much, Ranma had a hard time following Lee. The fuzzy brow in green was on the statue 1 second, and then he was crouching behind Gaara in a flash. According to his teammate, Gaara's sand, which reacted to protect him, was quick enough to deflect the lightning-fast punches and kicks, but the force behind them was sufficient to plow through the sand walls to the point where the limbs were visible through them, narrowly missing the raccoon-like boy. With a flipping kick that sliced through the automated defenses and struck Gaara's head, causing a scratch along one cheek, Lee appeared above Gaara out of nowhere. Guy yelled, Lee, explode! Yes, at one point, it appeared as though he was going to appear behind Gaara, and he did feel that in turn, but a second later, Lee appeared in front of him, throwing a punch powerful enough to send the redhead spinning several meters, leaving sand behind him. Ranma sensed something about the redhead, but the leaf Nin gathered began to feel good about their guy down there. It was as if the auras of Kuno and Ryuga were blended together. The best description he could think of was bloodlust. When Gaara stood up, his face began to crumble like plaster and fall off in pieces, exposing a crazy smile beneath the mask that had previously been his expression. Dense sand covered Gaara's entire body, acting as both a hunter mask and a set of personal armor. An angry frown replaced his neutral expression and mad smile as sand slithered through the air to cover the exposed areas. Gaara's face, arms, and clothing were all aligned with cracks, indicating that the armor was still protective. The fuzzy-browed boy was running around Gaara when Lee unwrapped a portion of his bandages and abruptly disappeared, leaving behind a ring of dust. With an upward kick similar to the one he had used on Sasuke, a move the bastard had already imitated and used in his prelim fight, Lee suddenly materialized inside Gaara's guard. Lee's version differed from Sasuke's in that he was able to catch up to his opponent more quickly and raise him considerably higher. Lee began directing their tumbling descent, head first and spinning tightly, while Gaara was swathed in bandages like a mummy. That landing is going to hurt, Ranma said with a wince. Crack. Lee leapt away and landed lightly just as Gaara hit. Blocks of stone protruded from the hole, which was several meters deep, littering the point of impact. Ranma sensed that something was amiss as Naruto encouraged his fellow Leaf Nin. The armor was eroding and dissolving in on itself. It was hollow. There, behind him, Ranma helped Naruto by focusing his gaze on the designated spot as he pointed it out. A sand mound began to take the shape of a human as it rose from the broken ground. Lee was smashed against the stone wall by a tidal wave of sand. An exhausted Lee blocked a second wave, which plowed him into the wall, creating a crater. A third tried to complete the task, but Lee was able to roll aside. Ranma claimed, "The boy can hardly move after that cool technique. However, he never gives up, which is very admirable, but it won't help him in the long run unless he can perform a miracle." "Looks like he has one ready," Ranma clarified as Lee dodged a crushing blow from the sand and faced his adversary with assurance once more instead of being smooth-cut stone as they had been. The floor was now primarily made up of protruding rock. It appears that he is dismantling his mental obstacles one by one. "What is his?" Naruto scratched his bewildered head and asked. "The celestial gates are barriers your mind places on your body to prevent you from killing yourself or harming every muscle in your body," Ranma explained. According to the evidence, he has completed one block, specifically the healing block, which would account for his sudden increase in energy. Another one is gone. Power whirled around Lee, his hair tousled in a wind that blew dust from all around him, his face flushed with life, and his veins throbbing. Naruto whispered, "Another one," while Lee squatted slightly and screamed as the wind increased and tiny stones were thrown into the air all around him as he gritted his teeth. Lee's face turned a deep red, and a thin stream of blood emerged from his left nostril. On the opposite side of the battlefield, Gaara's head snapped back from a kick that lifted him into the air, and Lee was replaced by an explosion of displaced air. In contrast, the sand moved almost slowly behind Gaara. Gaara was sent flying when a burst of displaced air suddenly erupted in front of him, but he was briefly sent back by a repeat performance. Gaara appeared to be a pinball in a ring of flippers for the next 20 seconds, as he bounced off what appeared to be invisible barriers and cracked the armor, scattering it slightly with each blow. Ranma said, "He just snapped a muscle. How are you aware of that?" Naruto made a demand. "We barely noticed Lee's speed a short while ago, but he must be much faster now." Ranma gave a crucial response, saying, "First of all, I am very good at adapting and learning, so while Lee speeds up, I am learning to read faster movements. Second, I noticed a distortion under his sleeves, and his speed slowed a little as it happened. Thirdly, Kakashi simply stated it." Fifth element gate. "Open," Lee bellowed from the tower's interior. "It hurts," Ranma remarked as Gaara's stomach hit him, sending air flying in all directions as if he had broken the sound barrier. Gaara stopped as everyone was getting ready for him to fall to the ground. Lee, who was still in the air, grabbed his sash and used the article of clothing as a yo-yo, drawing the redhead back into Lee's waiting fist. Lee's rough fall near the crater was nearly obscured by the dust that was scattered throughout the lower level by the subsequent impact with the ground. Gaara lay in the crater with her arm outstretched and her head turned toward Lee as the dust settled. Before anything else could be done, Gaara closed his hand as sand snaked out and wrapped around Lee's left limbs. A crunching sound echoed throughout the tower, followed instantly by Lee's agonized scream. The sand between Lee and Gaara exploded before more harm could be done, exposing a very serious guy. Even Ranma had failed to notice the green-clad man moving, though this could have been due to a number of things, such as the fight diverting her attention. Although Naruto was unable to hear what Gaara and Guy were saying, Lee lost by default because Guy stepped in to defend him. However, there isn't much chance that Lee will be able to fight on any longer. "Winner, Gaara!" exclaimed Hayate. Despite his broken arm and leg, Lee's abrupt standing up into a ready stance was a huge surprise. "He's not conscious yet," Ranma noted. "How do you know?" Naruto inquired and made an effort to verify. Ranma had been really helpful so far, and although he found it odd to have another voice in his head, it was better than constantly being ignored by everyone. "I've learned to recognize when others do something similar because I was trained to avoid attacks while I slept." Just observe Lee's half-closed, unfocused eyes and slouched posture to see that he is still unconscious. Sadly, he continued, "I don't know enough pressure points to heal him from something like those serious fractures. He's trying so hard to become a ninja without all the fancy ninjutsu or genjutsu that even when he's comatose, he gets up to fight. But perhaps there is still something I can do." With a nod, Naruto leapt over the cliff from the upper levels and arrived at Lee just as the medics did. "Oh, what a mess this kid is." As they got a better look, Ranma yelled, perhaps to tell Guy the same thing. The medic pulled him aside. "Let's look at it." He has ripped muscles everywhere. Broken bones in his left hand, forearm, left foot, and shins. He doesn't have any chakra that is worth mentioning. But his ki is powerful if he knew how to use it correctly. This could be resolved in a few weeks. I can't remember ever having a broken bone for longer than a few days, but when I did, my ki flow changed to heal it more quickly to speed up Lee's recovery. I force open his healing gate using our energy rather than his, leaving it open a crack. If I could just change Lee's ki to full healing mode, like opening his, that might work. Please pardon me. As his body knelt to the ground above Lee's head, cupping the right side above the right cerebral hemisphere, Naruto felt as though he was being pushed aside once more and was going along for the ride. A tiny spark of the energy Ranma called ki blasted from his hand into Lee's head as he felt concentration. Naruto felt a strange tingle in his left arm and leg and noticed an almost ethereal glow from Lee's left side limbs that no one else seemed to notice. He could almost feel the spark circling inside Lee's head until it found what it was looking for and latched on. Before the medics realized he was there and removed him, Naruto's hand poked a point on Lee's neck. As his breathing became more labored after that, they looked to see if he had hurt anyone. "What did you do, brat?" demanded one of the medic nin. "I did all I could," Ranma said on Naruto's behalf, his arms crossed in a bold act of defiance. "Unlike some people." "The words, Naruto-kun," said Guy. "What did you do to my precious student, please tell me?" After a brief moment of hesitation, Naruto responded, "I forced his second gate open a crack to help his healing, feeling relieved to be in control of his body again. But it caused him pain, so I numbed him from the neck down. It should wear off in an hour or two. He still needs to operate the bone fragments back where they belong. But I think his chances of returning to normal increased by about 30%. Guy declared. "Then you are a good friend," while striking the classic good guy pose of making a fist with his thumb pointing upward. His teeth even briefly gleamed and made a crystal ping. "And you do credit to my eternal rival, Kakashi. But when Lee is back in shape, I will challenge my rival once more to see who has the best student." Kakashi approached Naruto casually and asked, "Did you say something, Guy?" The words, "Ooh," another hip response by my eternal rival, made Guy smolder with jealous rage. "What?" Kakashi brushed it off. "Naruto-kun, we should clear the area and make room for the next battle. If he's as suspicious as I believe he is, he will inquire about our newly acquired abilities shortly," Ranma continued. Kakashi placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder and led him away, just as Ranma had predicted. The man in the mask remarked, "That was an interesting performance. I can't recall having seen anyone outside the Hyuga clan perform something like that. Be careful. The Hyuga might not like someone having figured out how to copy their healing techniques, and rogue elements of the clan might act in a way they think is necessary to prevent the secret from spreading." On Naruto's behalf, Ranma remarked, "I had to figure something out since all you've taught me is tree climbing," supporting Kakashi's theory that he had learned the skills from watching the Hyuga clan. "Not entirely true, Naruto-kun," contended Kakashi languidly. "I also taught you to work with your teammates even if you don't like one of them, but let us forget this for a moment and watch the match. Would Dosu Kinuta and Akamichi Choji please step forward for the final match?" Hayate asked. "I was surprised that Kakashi mistook our actions for an independent investigation of a different clan." Ranma acknowledged when Choji tried to squash his opponent by blowing himself up like a balloon and rolling around like a rogue boulder. He added, "That's an interesting technique." The fat lad roared, "I'm not fat, I'm pleasantly plump," as he charged his opponent. As Choji collided with the wall and Dosu attacked, Ranma said, "Ouch, I'd hate to be the one to rebuild this place with all the holes in the ground and walls." The attack appeared pointless at first, but then the muffled noise appeared. Choji's agonized cry was heard. He would have been better off not using that technique and going for proper earplugs, because the human body is mostly made of water, and water conducts sound. Hayate cried, "Winner, Dosu Kinuta. The preliminary trials for the third test has been completed. Would the winners please assemble to be assigned their opponent for the third test?" 8 teenagers walked to the ground floor and formed a line in front of the statue. Despite winning his battle, Naruto saw that Sasuke was not there. It seemed that he was still in the hospital. "Congratulations to all of you who earned the right to compete in the third test of the Chunin exam, even if one of your number is missing, Hokage-sama, if you would." The old man said, "Very well," and stepped forward while Hayate retreated to the sides. "I'd like to explain the main test." At last, inwardly, Naruto cried out, "Everyone will watch the main matches. As I mentioned before, you will all fight to demonstrate the might of your nations, so please don't hold back when it's your turn. The main event will happen in a month to give you time to get ready. Additionally, the lords and shinobi leaders will use this time to coordinate the meeting and notify the participants. Spend this time getting to know your opponents, formulating a plan, estimating your chances, and going over the fights you have witnessed today. Your battles up to this point have been against unidentified forces. This won't be the case going forward. A few of you have displayed all of your skills. Others competed against a more formidable opponent and suffered injuries. You should all use this month to grow and better yourself, but it's okay to take a break to regain your strength. The Hokage glanced at the group once for tension, expecting an interruption. As much as I'd like to dismiss you now, there remains something that has to be done before that happens, he said. Anko will come around with a box. This box will contain slips of paper. Each of you will take one piece of paper. Only one, Anko said, extending the box to Dosu. When the box finally reached Naruto, he carefully reached inside and took out a piece of paper bearing the number 1. The Hokage said, "Would you all please read your number?" after Anko completed her round. The first test examiner, Ibiki, pulled out a pad and wrote the numbers next to the names that were left uncrossed out with the exception of 4, which became the default number of the absent contestant. All numbers between 1 and 9 were read. Naruto had a sneaking suspicion that if the absent competitor had been anyone other than Uchiha Sasuke, they would have eliminated him for missing the last-minute preparations. Ibiki, would you kindly show them the match arrangements? The scarred man scribbled on the next sheet and then held up his pad. Of course, he said. With their names arranged by number at the bottom, the paper displayed a tournament hierarchy system. Naruto's name was associated with Neji. Naruto was discovered standing in front of the hospital's reception desk just in the morning of the day after the Hokage had dismissed him from the Forest of Death's central tower. What the hell? Additionally, the employees were very uncooperative. Naruto had spent almost an hour that morning trying to find Kakashi, his team leader, and after ruling out the majority of the locations he thought the pervert might be, he concluded that he must be seeing Sasuke. This was a great ending, Ranma thought. His loud exclamation made the woman behind the desk wince, as if she thought he would literally bite her head off. In a resigned sigh, a familiar voice said, "Naruto, please keep quiet. This is a hospital." In fact, it was the voice he wanted to hear. Naruto excitedly yelled, "Kakashi-sensei." Disregarding the instruction he had just received, "I have a request." "No need," said the silver-haired Junin. "I already know what you want to ask, and I've found someone to take care of your training." "But I want you to..." Once more, Kakashi interrupted, saying, "I've got some business to take care of. I don't have time to look after you." Naruto deadpanned, "You're going to train Sasuke, aren't you?" Although he was accustomed to people avoiding him, he believed that this would change once he was part of a team, and the trip to Wave Country had been a good beginning. What caused the abrupt change? Kakashi appeased him by saying, "Don't say that," but Ranma remarked that he wasn't actually refuting the charge. "I found you a teacher that is much more reliable than me." Naruto questioned, "And who would that be?" Before trembling, "Not that crazy code lady?" "No," a firm male voice cut him off from behind, "he's talking about me." Naruto looked at the man who had cut off a perfectly good conversation. "You, the closet pervert." The stiff man sniffed angrily and pushed his sunglasses up the bridge of his nose with his middle finger. Naruto went on, disregarding the impolite gesture the man had concealed as a harmless gesture. "What can this guy possibly teach me? I've already defeated him once with my harem no jutsu." Ebisu, Konohamaru's special Junin instructor, put his arm around Naruto's head, more precisely, his mouth, to silence any more complaints. "Harem number jutsu?" inquired Kakashi inquisitively. "It's nothing, really," Ebisu said with a trembling laugh. He whispered fiercely to Naruto, "Just be quiet about that, and I'll treat you to anything you want later on." As certain as they were standing there, Ebisu's wallet would ache for weeks after they collected on this meal, and Naruto and Ranma both planned to keep the man to his word. With thoughtfulness, Kakashi remarked, "I didn't know you two knew each other." Ebisu ruffled Naruto's hair and laughed, obviously exaggerated, "Ha ha, we go way back, right?" Instead of providing a dignified response to the question, Naruto went back to the subject at hand. "Why him? I don't really like him." "The same goes for me," Ebisu snapped back, abandoning the charade of camaraderie. "I'm only here because of Kakashi-kun's request." "Hey, now," interrupted Kakashi. "Let's not have any of that, Naruto. I have 3 students on my team, and of those 3, you are the worst at basic skills. He will teach them to you, thoroughly." Naruto would have probably erupted in a fit of indignant rage during the second part of the Chunin exams, demanding to know where he failed to stack up against Sakura and Sasuke. Before Ranma woke up in his mind, he was already aware, based on what they had determined to be him from a past life, that he was deficient in a number of areas and would need to quickly make up for them if he wanted to live longer than he had in the past. Even though Ranma had stated that he would train Naruto, it would be suspicious if he appeared out of the blue with information that no one could identify given what was sealed behind his navel. There was a good chance that people would assume he was under the influence of the Kyuubi. Their health would not benefit from this, they needed someone to train them instead, and when questioned later about their amazing progress, they would say they had been holding back. Naruto was given a lecture about his lack of chakra control efficiency, even though he had not explicitly requested it. Instead of allowing the leftover chakra to recycle back into his system or be saved for future attacks, he would use all of the chakra he had mixed for the purpose when only a small amount was required naturally. This would lead to fatigue more quickly, which would be very risky in a serious situation. He had never been able to form a proper bunshin, and when he did, they appeared sickly, which could be explained by the excess chakra's tendency to destabilize jutsu activation. Well, then, Kakashi concluded, adding that Naruto's immense stamina was the only factor that allowed him to outlast the others. Leave things in your hands, Ebisu-sensei. The wind that blew in through the roof's openings and the people's easygoing movements caused the steam to rise and dance in the air. The air was filled with feminine chatter and snickers, as well as the slow lapping sound of water hitting rock. Stretching and rubbing against one another to get rid of perspiration and grime, bare limbs showed more to anyone who happened to be observing when cleaning themselves. The most people wore was a tiny towel across their lap. As he passed the tiny peephole in the wall into the women's side of the hot springs, Naruto almost paused to gaze. One of the attractive women inside had leaned over to retrieve her bucket of bathing supplies and exposed everything to him for the brief moment he had peered in. Gorgeous curves, delicate, soft skin, and not a hair out of place anywhere. Naruto-kun. Ebisu's harsh voice screamed. It was truly astounding how much food that child could store, and Ebisu realized that in order to have his economy bounce back from this setback, he would need to reduce a few luxuries for the next week. Naruto had definitely fulfilled his promise to feed him. That is the women's bathing area, and I will not allow such shameless acts. Naruto adamantly objected. I didn't make the hole, with some assistance from Ranma regarding wording, and I certainly didn't pick this place, allowing me the opportunity to get a passing glance. And why are we here, anyway? Gonna take a bath before training. Ebisu grinned and raised his sunglasses once more. Actually, he said, this is where we will be training you. Gazing at the steaming waters in front of them, Naruto questioned, what can you possibly teach me here? In reality, it was outside the hot spring building, and the view was nearly perfect, with a big bonsai-like tree sitting atop a cliff that rose at one corner of the wall at its narrowest. A wooden bridge arched over the heated spring, giving the impression that it were a slim, warm river. In addition, a thin veil of mist was cast over everything by the steam rising from the heated waters, giving the impression that everything was a dream. You will learn to walk, Ebisu said with a sly smile, on water. What? According to Kakashi-sensei, you've already learned to climb trees without using your hands. Ebisu said this is a variation of that technique, but with water walking, you only need to channel the right amount of chakra into the water from you and your feet, as opposed to tree climbing, where you have to continuously create the same amount of chakra at the required location on a solid surface. It is meant as a training exercise to learn how to create a set amount of chakra. Perhaps it is better if I show you. As Ebisu inserted his hands into the ram seal, Ranma was particularly attentive, and Naruto noticed a faint blue glow along the man's feet. As he and Naruto watched Ebisu step onto the water, Ranma remarked, this is something similar to what the old troll did once. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to examine the technique more when I was alive, although this seems on a completely different level than finding foothold on tiny objects already floating in the water, but still somewhat similar. Ebisu was now standing tall and proud in the middle of the spring, and Ranma examined his entire energy pathway and output, not just the water's surface, which seemed to react to the man's feet the way a shallow puddle would when stepped on. Give me a few moments to figure out how to copy him before trying anything, okay? Ranma interrupted Naruto's impulse to try to imitate his teacher right away. The only reason Ebisu didn't insist on forcing Naruto to try the technique was because he grudgingly dropped to the ground and glared at the water with what could be described as a focused, intense expression. Before the boy got up and formed the ram seal and chakra flared beneath his feet, minutes went by with only a few twitches of Naruto's brow. He did not, however, try to jump in feet first, as Ebisu had anticipated. With one foot firmly planted on the ground, Naruto only touched one foot to the water. Ebisu expected Naruto to fall in because the foot on the water had insufficient chakra underneath it and had passed through the surface, but instead the boy merely shuddered and shook from the intense heat as he quickly removed it. Youch! When Naruto realized that shaking it didn't help, he yelled, grabbed his red sandal-clad foot, and began blowing on it. Now you understand why I selected this location for your training grounds? Ebisu asked, trembling from shock at seeing a genin use both water walking and tree climbing simultaneously to keep from falling in when the water walking failed. The hot water is to keep me from falling in, which makes me want to learn faster and produce results faster than if we had tried this somewhere cool, Naruto said after a few moments of silence. Ebisu was genuinely taken aback by the thoughtful response he received, and he couldn't help but think of how much Konohamaru had changed in just one day with this boy. Maybe he wasn't the ninja fool he presented himself as. Ninja. A ninja's life is one of deception. Naruto had understood this, and he must have done so early in life, based on his academic record. The special Junin instructor was nearly incensed that he had not realized this earlier. Naruto had deceived the entire Konoha village, which is full of people accustomed to dealing with and identifying deception, into believing that he was just a loud and dim prankster who failed 3 exams before becoming a genin. Ebisu realized that this deception should have been exposed by the unique circumstances that led to Naruto's acceptance into the official shinobi ranks, but nobody appeared to notice. Naruto is obviously a talented ninja in the making. As per Ranma's instructions, Naruto was on his 10th attempt, gradually increasing the amount of chakra he used each time. By this point, the foot had remained buoyant for 2 seconds before the weight of the leg pushed it through, while Ebisu was having his epiphany about what he thought Naruto had done. When he finally succeeded in keeping his weight on his foot without sinking in deeper than his ankle on his 15th attempt, Naruto began to gripe to Ranma about how long it was taking. Ranma retorted, "It may be slower than you'd like, but would you rather try both feet and end up a boiled egg? As opposed to rushing into it and getting hurt by missing something, it's better to take your time and be confident." Naruto grumbled to himself about his misfortune of having a cautious second personality and tried again, but instead of following Ranma's advice, he doubled the power they had used the previous time and found firm support on the steaming water's surface. Ranma sighed, "You're really impatient, aren't you? We might as well try it out and tweak it later." At the current level of chakra, all that happened when Naruto stomped his foot on the water as hard as he could was the splishing and splashing of water, resembling a shallow puddle it held fast, so Naruto took his other foot off the ground and placed it on the water. "I succeeded, after 10 seconds without falling in," the blonde exclaimed. Splosh. Naturally, the boy's lack of focus caused the chakra to stop flowing, which eliminated the foothold he was standing on. Warning. Hot, 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 hot. Ebisu saw an elderly man sitting in front of the hole in the wall leading to the women's section, laughing strangely, as Naruto frantically scurried for the spring's bank. Ebisu said to the man, "I don't know who you are," briefly losing sight of the puzzle that was Naruto, who had emerged from the water. "Yet I will not tolerate such shameful behavior." Ebisu hurried in with the intention of teaching the elderly man a lesson in decency because he had to maintain his reputation as a kind man, and it would not be accepted to allow a pervert to enjoy himself on behalf of gullible women in his vicinity. They were all taken aback when the elderly man was engulfed in a dense cloud of smoke that quickly dissipated, exposing him to be perched atop a toad that was easily as big as a rhino. The special Junin instructor was knocked unconscious when the amphibian's mouth opened and a thick tongue erupted. The old man reprimanded me casually, "Be quiet, man, you don't want me caught, do you?" Before Ranma could calm him down, Naruto became enraged after witnessing what had been done to his appointed sensei. "Do you think you're doing what the hell? Who do you think you are?" the blonde yelled. "Hey." The old man with red tattooed lines running from his eyes down his cheeks laughed confidently, and struck a fighting stance on top of the frog. "I'm glad you asked, Toad Sennin, the sacred master Sennin of Mount Myobokugama. Keep it in mind." The man landed nimbly on his Geta-covered feet, and the frog vanished in the same cloud of smoke it had come in. "Hey, Arrow Sennin." After being somewhat reassured by the confusion the man's introduction had caused, Naruto corrected himself in a lower shout. "That guy was supposed to train me. You did this, but why?" The Sennin simply replied, "Because he got in the way of my work," and reached into his inner pocket. "I'm a writer, and I'm working on my next book. This one." A book from the same series that Kakashi always ducked into when he should have been watching them, the ones with the clear warning on the back not to leave them in the hands of children, was thrust out for Naruto to see. "You dismiss my sensei for that nonsense? And how does snooping on nude women become work, anyway?" demanded Naruto incredulously. "It's a crime for someone your age, but if I did it, I might get away with it as a joke. How will you now make up for the training I lost?" "What? Walking in the water?" the elderly man sneered. "No, I just finished learning that," Naruto shot back, "so if you're a man at all, then take charge of your behavior and teach me something." "I refuse to instruct you," the man yelled. "I don't like men, and I detest rude brats. Additionally, I'm not stupid enough to fall for flattery, so don't try. Oh, yes. Based on what Ranma knew about being sexy as a woman, Naruto challenged her and stomped into the doorway to the women's changing room, where he used his most infamous and amazing original jutsu, Oiroke no Jutsu, with a transformed appearance. The updated Oiroke no Jutsu was shorter than the original, with bright red hair in a dragon tail, a more prominent chest, and lacy silk stockings, panties, and a bra that barely covered the well-proportioned female body instead of just concealing it with ethereal wisps of steam. After giving the Sennin a sly smile, the celestial vision hastily grabbed a towel from the stack near the door and nearly covered herself. Eek! A pervert! Ranma had mastered the delicate yet high-pitched shriek that came from Naruto when he was still a girl. This was because he had spent a lot of time in bathhouses with terrified women and was able to mimic it quite well. Within 3 seconds of Naruto's scream, a whole horde of women in towels rushed out of the hot springs, carrying buckets of bath supplies and searching for the pervert. He's right there. I was almost finished changing when the old man poked his head in and said that a peephole wasn't enough, Naruto said, sobbing and pointing to him. Knowing what was going to happen, the Sennin raised his hands in defense, only to discover that they were covered in female underwear. Knowing that he was going to be skinned alive, he ran away as quickly as his geto would allow, trailed by a mob of angry women. After being the apparent near victim of a rape, some of the older women stayed to comfort the distraught young woman. Naruto, not wanting to be discovered, continued to play the part for a little while longer, managing to slip away while the remaining women were preoccupied with the return of the angry, unsuccessful women. Naruto thought about the weapon problem Ranma had raised a few times during the preliminary stages after he had managed to get away from the scantily clad women at the hot springs. The issue was that he had no idea where he could find high-quality weapons at a fair price. Given that he was going to face their teammate in the first fight of the third task, would they help him? Would they refuse to help him because of the Kyuubi? Perhaps that 10-10 girl would know. She appeared to have a lot of weapons, and Fuzzy Brows Sensei would know where to get weights to improve training results. If you find them and ask, you'll find out that if we can't afford new weapons, we'll have to make some with what we can find. If we're going to use weapons, we'd better have a greater variety than what we currently have. Better get it over with, Ranma urged. All right, Naruto said. Now, where would I be if I were a Kunoichi who collected weapons? Fortunately, not literally. Naruto was ejected from almost every shop and weaponsmith in Konoha before he happened upon the girl he was seeking. Before 10-10 realized he wasn't assaulting her or harassing her, he had to dodge and weave for almost a minute to avoid the swipes of various close-quarters weapons, the risks of running into a skilled Kunoichi. Even though she was still recovering from her battle with the Sand Girl, 10-10 was doing well thanks to a few minor but significant wounds and the medic Nin's healing. She was also surprisingly helpful in listing the stores, smiths, and traders where she was able to obtain the more unusual weapons in her collection. It's not like you can win against Neji-san anyway, she said, so it won't hurt his chances if you get yourself a new weapon. Naruto left with a friendly farewell in the form of a raspberry behind her back, even though he didn't feel particularly fond of the girl's intentions. As they got closer to the first store on the list, Ranma remarked, "They won't let us get any new weapons, you know." Naruto sighed, "I know, and if they let me, I either get low-grade metal or inflated prices." But would they let me get good weapons? Ranma wondered. They shouldn't be able to see through a henge unless the shopkeepers have been trained as ninjas. Ignoring Ranma's undignified exclamation, Naruto brought his hands together and focused on his mental image of Ranma's male body in a standard shinobi uniform with leaf insignia. Sometimes I'm so brilliant it's scary, Naruto realized. Henge. Ding. Naruto cautiously made his way into the store, checking to see if anyone was staring at him. A loud voice called out, "Good afternoon, customer," and asked how I could help. Naruto decided with a smile that his disguise was apparently sufficient. Thunk. It hurts. Naruto rubbed the area of his skull that had been bruised by one of his new weapons. Excited by the prospect of obtaining new weapons, Naruto disregarded Ranma's advice and began displaying the least dangerous of the three, which led to a nearly fractured skull. In a resigned tone, Ranma reprimanded, "I told you that learning the basics was necessary before moving on to the flashy stuff." However, that would require days, Naruto grumbled. "It should be more like months to years," Ranma clarified. "My ability to learn things isn't that poor." Ranma believed that not all weapons required a sharp edge, and the nunchaku was a very versatile weapon. The weapon in question was a composite metal nunchaku, which was supposed to be lighter, stronger, and harder than the steel used to hold a class ninja convicts. A thin layer of rubber bandages was wrapped around the metal to lessen hand fatigue. and the core of the weapon was filled with lead for increased impact power and to compensate for the weight reduction in the main metal. This particular weapon had its own holster, which was strapped to Naruto's left thigh. Ranma persuaded Naruto to purchase a second weapon, a sai, which was made of the same material as the nunchaku but only made pointy rather than sharp. Ranma claimed that this weapon was very versatile and that it could fit into the kunai pouch if he sacrificed 3 of the thrown knives. The last weapon, which Naruto could not understand why he needed it because he already had his kunai and they were disposable, was a machete made of ordinary steel, with a handle wrapped in ordinary bandages and a blade about the length of Naruto's forearm. According to Ranma, it was a useful tool and weapon, and it had a certain intimidation factor that a kunai did not have. Apparently, a large blade was scarier than a small one. The machete was not too big to carry around, and it could, in a pinch, function as a small shield because its width was about the same as the back of Naruto's hand. It was unquestionably a sharp weapon, as the shopkeeper had demonstrated by removing a hair from his head and dropping it on the blade, cleaving it in two with less force than gravity gave the hair. Like the nunchaku, it had its own holster, which was placed at Naruto's lower middle back so it could be hidden under his jacket. "I'll teach you one of my father's sealed techniques if you prove me wrong," Ranma enticed. "You're on," excitedly, Naruto yelled. Naruto began reciting a slow kata, then repeated it, and it was done exactly as Ranma had instructed. Even though he had thrown away his jacket during training because it was becoming too wet, Naruto continued to work as the seconds turned into minutes and the minutes into hours. "Is there no way to expedite this?" As the sun began to set, Naruto gasped and was covered in bruises from the several times his nunchaku had escaped his grasp in the first place. Ranma snorted, "Only if there were more of us," before the remark gave them both an idea. "More of us?" Naruto smirked as he asked. The Chunin exams had added to the mountainous work that Sandaime Hokage had to do every day, so he was taking a break in his office to check on the progress of Konoha's most unexpected ninja's training. While the original was performing handstands on the water, Sarutobi could see through his crystal ball that a veritable army of blondes were performing multiple kata on the banks of the river that ran through Training Ground 7. As he watched the amazing scene of dozens of Naruto training without that training being a dogpile on the original or the target, the old ninja known as the Professor laughed and said, "Hey, it seems he has discovered the benefit and curse of the Kage Bunshin. Though with the Kyuubi healing him, he probably can't even feel the curse. I look forward to your match, Naruto-kun." Naruto was able to stay away from the recovered Ebisu for a full week, during which he trained in both kata and water walking to strengthen his chakra control. During the first few days after he woke up, Ranma had mentioned that something had been interfering with the control, which was what had made movement so challenging. However, it had disintegrated due to the strain of his recuperating ki and Naruto's abundant chakra supply. However, Ranma continued to believe that Naruto lacked control, so he made him perform water walking, various stretches, and weight training. Maeda Guy provided him with weights that weighed between 40 and 90 pounds each, which he had to move in total. 250 pounds. Lee's sensei was more than willing to lend Naruto Lee his unused weights, but they would have been too much to begin with, so the older set was given to him instead of the current one. Lee was still recovering, but he was progressing swiftly, and even without an opponent, he would be in fighting condition by the finals. Even after getting the recommended 6 to 8 hours of sleep, Naruto was still exhausted. On the plus side, those memories created new pathways into Naruto's reactions, or more commonly known as muscle memory. Naruto's memories of the scores of clones he made every day had a habit of wearing him out, which is why Ranma advised waiting until he was in bed before dismissing them after the first time the memories overlapped and gave him the impression that he had practiced for more than a week in a single day. Naruto was exhausted not only from his weight training and chakra control, but also from the dozens of memories that had suddenly been thrown into his head, which was causing his mind to overload. Sleep was a normal response to so many experiences in a short period of time, and it would give the mind a few hours to sort out what was useful about the new information and what could be fused together with nearly identical memories to get a more complete one, or experience. Naruto had up to 50 clones active throughout the day, performing the kata Ranma taught him in a few groups. Any regular person trying to use the Kage Bunshin in the same way would probably get a splitting headache after only a few clones were active for approximately an hour. The purpose of the stretches was to help Naruto get supple enough to perform some of the taijutsu maneuvers for which Ranma had gained notoriety while he was still living. Even though Ranma was a rigorous taskmaster, staying in one location tends to make it easier for people to find you, which is what happened. Naruto's designated teacher discovered him separated from his clones a week after he began his own training regimen. The special Junin with the bandana demanded, "Naruto, where have you been? Kakashi-san assigned me to be your instructor." and I do not allow my students to run away from their training? But I won't hear it. Ebisu cut in. Now show me that you've mastered water walking, and then we might move on to a basic elemental jutsu of your choosing. But get to work. Naruto walked carelessly into the middle of the river, sat down, and glared at the adult while complaining about unyielding teachers. As the seconds stretched into minutes, Ebisu began to realize that his assigned pupil had not been relaxing as he had thought. After 10 minutes in which Naruto made no mistakes at all, Ebisu conceded defeat and called the boy back in. So, which basic elemental jutsu would you like to learn? He murmured. There are some basic water, fire, wind and earth jutsu available to genin that I can teach you, depending on which element you favor, of course. Naruto had not wanted to hear the voice say, "Peefed, basic jutsu, what the boy needs to learn is to summon," since his first day of training. Jiraiya-san, Ebisu said curtly, "What are you doing here?" The white-haired author of Kakashi's favorite book shrugged and said, "The old man called in a favor. He asked me to teach him the Kachiyose no Jutsu to better prepare him for the finals of the Chunin exams, so run along to let me teach this little upstart and be on my way. I've got lots of research to conduct and little time to do it in." Ebisu protested. There's no way Naruto is ready to start with Kachiyose. He may have mastered water walking, but the control needed for Kachiyose is beyond him at this time. Naruto attempted to interrupt, saying, "Excuse me? If the kid can create hundreds of Kage Bunshin to beat up a Chunin, then he's ready for the Kachiyose," replied Jiraiya. Ebisu gritted his teeth and gave up. "Fine," he said, "but I will be supervising your teaching methods to make sure you don't corrupt more youth than you do with your books." Naruto questioned, "Do I get a say in this? If you think you need to stay to watch, then feel free, you may learn something." Jiraiya gasped. "I guarantee that within the month, this kid will be able to summon Gamabunta himself." Naruto complained, "What's so special about frogs, anyway? Can't you teach me to summon something better? Maybe a crocodile, or a wolf?" Jiraiya argued, "Toads are great summons." Only realizing Naruto's statement after he had insulted his summoning contract. Much better than crocodiles, wolves, slugs or snakes. Then Naruto thought, "So I do get a choice. It is customary to sign the same contract as the one who taught you," said Ebisu. "Then why can't we get someone with a better contract to teach me?" "Because." Jiraiya fiercely protested. "Because what?" "Just because," Jiraiya concluded. "I am one of the legendary Sennin, and I am taking you on as my apprentice until you start your finals, and the student does what the master says, no questions asked." Naruto retorted, "Goodbye," and began to make his way to the village. "Where are you going?" Jiraiya interrogated. "I'm going to see Ji-san about getting a better contract to sign, because I'm not going to learn anything from an insane, perverted old man. I'd rather teach myself, like I did with the Kage Bunshin." Jiraiya frantically begged, "Wait," and succeeded in separating Naruto from the village. "I can't break my promise to Sarutobi-sensei. If you sign my contract and learn from me, I'll teach you the Yondaimi's prize technique. Only I know it after he gave his life for the village. Not even the Sharingan can copy it." Naruto and Ranma became more interested as a result if he ever found himself in a situation where his normal abilities were insufficient and all he had to give up was to sign a summoning contract for toads rather than another animal. It would be a nice backup jutsu that the Uchiha couldn't copy. Deal. Ebisu smirked when he realized Jiraiya had fallen for a trap, whether deliberate or unintentional, and would now be expected to teach Naruto not only the Kachiyose no Jutsu but also the infamous jutsu the Yondaime invented and taught only his former sensei. Naruto had grabbed Jiraiya's hand and shook it before he could change his mind. He then went back to sit at the river's banks, waiting for instruction. Jiraiya stood motionless for almost a minute, stunned by his own despair, before Naruto called, "Come on, old man, while the rest of us are still young." When Naruto got to the river early the following morning, he made 30 clones and sent them off to teach Keita how to use the 3 weapons he now possessed. Ranma had Naruto practice acrobatics on the river to kill time, and he was to try to catch a fish without getting his hands wet or falling through the water. The blonde boy was discovered by Jiraiya and Ebisu in this manner. Arms thrown into the water with the rest of him on top, and a little stack of fish by the bank. 1 or 2 of them still writhing in an attempt to get away from the oxygen-rich water before drowning. "You guys want fish for breakfast?" Naruto asked haltingly as he clasped an exceptionally fat fish between his hands and withdrew his soaked arms from the water. Jiraiya yelled, "Stop playing around and come over here." Naruto grinned. The only thing Jiraiya had managed to extract from him the previous day was a blood-stained signature on the enormous scroll he was carrying. After that, the boy had succeeded in giving the 2 adults the slip. After all, it had been late in the day, and Naruto had desired to do some real training before going to bed. In order to preserve them, the blonde boy asked Ebisu to bring them back to his apartment and put them in the freezer before following instructions. Future planning was crucial, and he could save the money he spent on food by catching these fish for a rainy day. The elderly man with white hair exclaimed, "Now, pay close attention, because I have no intention of showing you how to do this an unnecessary amount of times." Ranma watched intently as Naruto saw the white-haired Sennin bite his thumb, then proceed through the hand signals before slamming his hand into the ground. The same toad that had seemed to slap Ebisu on the first day of Naruto's training emerged from a puff of smoke. Jiraiya declared, "Your turn, brat," obviously irritated that Ebisu was there because it meant he couldn't slip away to conduct more research without facing more irksome repercussions. Naruto rested his head on the heel of his left hand while sitting on the ground and staring at a pebble by the river's edge. Jiraiya began, "What are you waiting for? Get to it," but Ebisu cut him off by covering his mouth with his hand. The young man hissed, "Don't disturb him, this was how he started when I showed him water walking. Just give him a few moments to figure this out." Jiraiya was prepared to prod the boy with a stick to check if he was still conscious after almost 5 minutes had passed with no improvement. With a cry of, "Kuchio's number jutsu," Naruto's eyes snapped back to the present as the old man was searching for a stick. His hands then made the seals and slammed the flat of his hand into the ground after bringing his right thumb to his mouth and biting a hole in it. Naruto was standing on the ground when a cloud of smoke broke out, and when it subsided, he could see a tadpole thrashing. Jiraiya pushed Naruto aside so she could get a better look at the creature and asked incredulously, "That's it? After all that fuss, this is all you managed to produce?" The tadpole vanished in a tiny cloud of smoke. "I'm working my way up," protested Naruto. "That's not how it's done," Jiraiya protested. "You start by giving it all you've got, to summon Gamabunta, who has to accept you, and then you can start summoning smaller toads." With an intransigent sigh, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and faced away from the Sennin. "To each their own," he said. "I'm going to do it my way, you can do it yours." "Why you little, Jiraiya-san," interrupted Ebisu. "We should let Naruto-kun learn at his own pace. He started the same way with water walking, I might add." "There is a vast difference between water walking and Kuchiyose no Jutsu," Jiraiya said. "Perhaps, but every journey starts with a single step," retorted Ebisu. "You lil punk. What are you doing on my head?" Naruto had finally called in the boss, and he didn't care that a frog was yelling at him. It had taken him an additional 2 weeks to experiment with various chakra outputs, reduce the number of clones he was training with to 0, and take his weights off for a few days to replenish the energy he had wasted, but he had succeeded. Even though he was standing on Gamabunta's head, he was feeling exhausted, and this was his first attempt of the day, so he wouldn't be able to repeat the feat very often. "Jiraiya. Where the hell are you?" the enormous amphibian went on. "Why the hell did you call me here?" Naruto called out, "Excuse me," following a brief juggling act of celebration. "I'm the one who summoned you here." Gamabunta snarled, "Very amusing, Jiraiya," so loudly that Naruto's ears popped. "Putting this brat on my head and telling him to fool me like that. According to Naruto, I summoned you. If you don't believe me, check the contract. Where is that thing, anyway? Oi, Ero Sennin. Where are you? I need that contract to show this old fart that I'm telling the truth." Gamabunta, his pipe trembling with the rage of the offended amphibian, demanded, "Old fart?" Naruto desperately wanted to drop to his knees and say he was sorry for his impulsive name-calling, but Ranma stopped him. "He will never respect us if we show fear at the first sign of intimidation." Naruto yelled, "Yeah, instead, I summoned you, and I can send you back. The only reason I even signed your stupid contract was because Jiraiya promised me to teach me the Yondaime's most prized jutsu if I did. I don't need you." Gamabunta growled around his pipe. "Iaughta snap your head off, but I won't. If you apologize, I'll make you my underling." "Like hell you will. I summoned you, that means I'm your master, not the other way around." Naruto stared at Gamabunta's one visible eye for a long time, and the gaze was returned. When Gamabunta finally said, "Let's make a bet instead. If you can stay on my head for the rest of the day, you win and I'll accept you as a Toadmaster, but if I win, you give up on this summoning business once and for all. Do we have a deal?" Naruto screamed. "Why is it that no one ever just gives me what I need? They always feel the need to beat about the bush or try to get out of a deal by making a bet. I'm sick of it, but if that is all it takes to get you to do as I say, then let's get it on, we have a deal." Naruto had just finished speaking when he was thrust against Gamabunta's slick, knobby skin, the air rushing around him in a thunderous roar. The pressure soon gave way to a sensation of weightlessness, and it took him a moment to realize that the toad had leapt, was at its peak, and would soon descend again. Naruto was only able to adhere to Gamabunta's skin and prevent being flung off by using chakra. Once back on the ground, the toad started to run back and forth, into the lake at the top of the waterfall, and then back up into the air. For Naruto and Ranma, who was watching, it was a nightmare of chakra control, balance, and strength in a precarious balance. Ranma was pretty sure that this would have been an extremely fascinating sight to onlookers. Like a rodeo of some weird kind, the others would knock him off balance if they overcompensated for one. Naruto could have sworn that he had been holding onto the giant amphibian's moist skin for weeks rather than 12 hours as the sun was setting. Sweat and water had soaked him after using weights and performing exercises for the entire day. His muscles were hurting more than before. Additionally, he was physically exhausted from using up so much chakra in a single day. However, Naruto persisted until the sun's last rays had passed behind the horizon because he was determined not to fail. We succeeded, Naruto and Ranma thought joyfully before sleep took them away and they fell to the ground, only to be violently struck by Gamabunta's long tongue, which caught them and placed them gently on his head. When Naruto woke up, his first thought was, "Where am I?" It was an obvious question, since he had been on top of a mountainous toad the last time he was conscious, and he woke up in a soft bed. The blonde boy realized, "My fish," and sat up abruptly. "Where are my fish? They'll go bad if I don't get them into the freezer soon." How troublesome, a sigh came from the bedside. Shikamaru was lounging in a typical wooden chair when Naruto turned around. He was in the hospital, as evidenced by the white walls and the antiseptic-like smell of the air. "Shikamaru," yelled Naruto, "why am I here? How did I get here? What happened to my fish?" Shikamaru reminded him languidly, "Calm down, you're in a hospital, you know." "But why am I here? The nurse said something about finding you outside next to a giant set of prints in the ground after what felt like an earthquake. You apparently suffered chakra exhaustion. You've been asleep for almost an entire day." "A day? My training." Not wasting any time, Naruto jumped out of bed and discovered his belongings in a cupboard beneath his bedside table. He quickly put them all on in the right order before making sure everything was there and jumping out the window, landing next to a frog's footprint that was bigger than the base of a contemporary apartment building. Shikamaru sighed and said, "That boy has always been a few tiles short of a go board. Better take this basket of fruits back home before they spoil. Shame Choji couldn't have them. I guess that's how it is when you overeat on pork. How troublesome." Even though Jiraiya had promised to teach him the Yondaimi's most valuable technique, and Ebisu had promised to teach him a basic elemental jutsu, Naruto felt he didn't have time to do so just yet. He needed to refine what he had learned thus far in order to advance and get better before the fight, which was less than a week away. In order to avoid being bothered, the blonde shinobi located a free training area that was hidden from the village's view. Naruto exclaimed, "Tajyu Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," and was instantly encircled by more than 100 clones. "You all know what we have to do. Ready your weapons, attack." The original was rushed by a large group of blondes, each of whom drew a weapon from his arsenal. Despite having all of Naruto's knowledge, the clones lacked Ranma, which was a privilege and a source of torture reserved for the original. The machete was used to repel or completely avoid a flurry of shuriken. Ninja wires attached to thrown kunai were cut and avoided. Naruto switched weapons, using his nunchaku to parry a few machetes and then striking out at any limbs that were within striking range. The now spinning weapon deflected another round of shuriken. The clone was flung over Naruto's shoulder into another nunchaku, dispelling both of them as the short chain of the nunchaku wrapped around an outstretched hand holding a kunai. The sai, which he used with his free hand, deflected an approaching machete long enough for the nunchaku to knock the cloned weapon's owner off balance with a forceful blow to the head. A clone nunchaku knocked the sai out of Naruto's hand, forcing the original to fight with his remaining arm and legs while holding the appendage for a brief period of time. Naruto stepped on the fallen sai, used chakra to adhere it to the underside of his sandal, and then raised it to slash at a clone that was approaching from behind, piercing the clone's exposed side. The sparring continued in this manner for almost an hour, during which Naruto was left a bruised, sweating, panting mess with no more clones to attack him. Naruto let himself fall to the ground where he had been standing, almost impaling himself on his sai, which had been dropped again at some point, although he was not nearly as exhausted as he had been after spending the entire day adhering to the head of a giant toad. The machete, which had been violently yanked away in a manner akin to Naruto's disposal of a few clones, lay a few feet away. Among his 3 new weapons, The nunchaku was the only one that had not been ripped from Naruto at some point. Naruto gasped and focused on catching his breath. Not good enough. He said this might not have been so tough if he hadn't been wearing his weights, but because Ranma had insisted on stopping by the apartment to pick them up on the way here, they were all securely fastened to him and were contributing more weight to his movements than his own body. Can't I do this without the weights? I'm still strong without them. That wasn't our full strength if you're talking about stopping a snake with a house-sized head. If my memory serves me correctly, the Kyuubi was generating some extra power because we didn't have emotional control, and since we might eventually lose access to that power and become powerless, we could do much worse than to strengthen ourselves rather than relying on demon power-ups. Fine, said Naruto, but can't I have another few minutes? My arms hurt. We're not hurt, so it's good that you're experiencing muscle tearing and re-knitting because it indicates that we're headed in the right direction. Before your heart rate returns to resting levels, get back to it. Before we begin the one-on-one sparring session, we must run at least 2 laps around the village. Tonight, at the latest, we can rest. In the distance, a shadow moved from behind a tree to follow them for a while after watching the entire sparring session, but they were too distracted to notice it. Early in the morning, the enormous gates of Konoha slowly and completely opened. Both ninja and civilians flocked to the main street to watch as a huge procession of shinobi guards in palanquins passed through on their way to the arena. The Chunin selection final exam was upon them, and with the contestants this year, it was an extremely exciting day that took place twice a year over the elemental countries, though it was rarely the same location twice in a row. Too anxious about the exam to sleep through the night, Naruto had been awake since the break of dawn. However, Naruto ran an additional round around Konoha to get rid of the exuberant excitement on his way back to perform his kata and a few cool-down stretches. He was able to finish in time to witness the incoming procession of nobles and significant individuals. Naruto carefully strapped his machete to his lower back, pushed the nunchaku into its thigh holster after a test spin, and slid the pointy middle prong of his sai under the strap of his right-hand kunai holster. He still had plenty of time before he had to be there, so he fiddled to get the outer prongs to slide over the strap. Before heading to the arena, Naruto made the decision to strut around, clear his head, and see where his feet took him. He did this with pride, straightening his forehead protector and wiping imaginary dust off his orange jacket. Even though it was impossible to tell by looking at him, Naruto was nervous about a finals-related topic because one of his clones had heard the Sandaime talk about him with Jiraiya the day before. They had simply chosen to wait until they would not be accused of interfering with an official event like the Chunin selection exams by denying one of the contestants training time. It would seem that the Hyuga had not been without a reaction to his medical assistance to the current clan heiress. After the exams were over, they had demanded that Naruto be questioned, his apartment inspected, and if it was no longer possible to question him, his body dissected to find out what else he had been hiding. They also wanted to see if there was any indication of how he learned about Tenketsu, not even from the Anbu anatomy charts. Ranma was aware that there were only 2 possible explanations for their permission to listen in given the skill of the 2 people conducting the conversation. The first, and least likely, possibility is that they were too preoccupied with their concerns to notice the eavesdropping clone. The second, and most likely, explanation was that they had let him hear, just because they weren't supposed to tell him directly. Whether properly warned or not, there was no tangible proof of Naruto's extra personality, and the only way someone could learn about it without being told was if they had the ability to read minds, something that only one clan possessed, and they probably dared not because they were afraid of unintentionally becoming entangled with the Kyuubi. Naruto never understood how they allowed someone as careless as Kakashi to look after some kids, but before he knew it, he was standing in front of 3 familiar poles, one of which he had once enjoyed being tied to for half a day before someone realized he was there. Naruto's attention was drawn to movement, and he recognized the back of Hyuga Hinata. Apparently, she hadn't yet noticed him. "Oi! Hinata-chan!" exclaimed the blonde demon container with joy. "What are you doing here?" Half hiding behind the closest post, the dark-haired girl jumped in surprise at being addressed so abruptly. "En Naruto-kun?" "Something wrong?" Naruto asked inquisitively as he approached. "Do you have a fever? You're all red?" Hinata stumbled. "I'm fine, En Naruto-kun," and pressed her index fingers together uneasily. Thank you FF for being concerned about me. Naruto-kun, but shouldn't you be at the finals?" With a confident laugh, Naruto said, "Bah, that's still a while away, plenty of time, I'm just taking a stroll, and somehow ended up here. This is where I became an official genin, you know." Hinata stammered, "Oh, sorry F for intruding," obviously hoping that no one would notice her. "No problem," said Naruto. There was a pregnant silence between the 2 genin. With an oddly inappropriate seriousness, Naruto questioned, "Neji is really strong, right?" Why yes. Hinata grudgingly acknowledged she didn't have time to stutter before blurting, but you might be able to beat him, Naruto-kun. Maybe, Naruto concurred, his confidence briefly faltering as Ranma's evaluation of the boy crept through. Hinata confirmed, I can know you have a good chance, Naruto-kun, pausing briefly to gather her thoughts before continuing. When you cheered me on, I felt stronger, I started liking myself a little more. Not many noticed anything different, but I felt like I changed, just a little bit, all thanks to you, Naruto-kun. Naruto said, I do have a way of influencing people, with a smile. Even though that might be the case, he realized that not all of the changes were positive. But do you think I'm as strong as I pretend to be? I don't think you pretend to be strong, Hinata meekly objected, but there was a tinge of her protest. Even when you fail and fall, you have the strength to get back up. You're not perfect, true, but I think you're a very strong person, Naruto-kun. Naruto could almost feel Ranma's smirk as Hinata realized what she had said, blushed once more, and pulled slightly further behind the wooden pole. Naruto boasted, thanks, Hinata-chan, his mood much higher than it had been moments earlier when he had been apprehensive about whether all of his training would be sufficient. I was a little depressed just then, but now I feel great. You know what, Ranma cut off a description of the teenage girl that might have offended her by saying, Loverboy, if we don't hurry up, we'll be late. I like you, Naruto hurriedly concluded, remembering the last part of the sentence. Even though he had forgotten the main idea of how he had previously thought about her, it was better to give a synopsis of his forgotten statement than nothing at all. Gotta go or I'll be late. Naruto didn't notice the red flush that was adorning his conversation partner's face and could have been mistaken for a sunset as he fled. The crowd crammed into the many seats in the stands at the arena was growing restless. Two of the competitors had yet to appear. There was still plenty of time for them to appear because Naruto was supposed to fight Neji at the start, but the matchups had somewhat changed from what they had seen following the preliminary stages. The man who wore a mummy costume in the winter was taken off the list entirely. Naruto wondered absently if this was because he was late, and if so, why Sasuke's name hadn't been removed. Something must have happened, Ranma thought, to keep the sound nin from competing, and with enough notice to let the judge know and have time to remove him from the list. The proctor, a new one, for some reason, proclaimed, you guys are the stars, and turned away from the 7 ninja in attendance to nibble on his toothpick. Stop looking around and face the customers. Ranma warned, be careful what you use against Neji. Anything Ebisu and Jiraiya can't claim they taught us would only add to the suspicion that people already have about our sudden leap in skill, and it might even lead to a lynching because some stupid idiots believe our skill is due to the big fluffy animal in our stomach. I understand, Naruto moaned, unintentionally releasing a small sound that he immediately covered up due to slight stretching. The Sandaime Hokage's elderly yet commanding voice echoed throughout the arena. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Hidden Leaf Chunin selection exam. We will now start the main tournament matches between the 8 participants that made it through the preliminaries. Please stay and watch to the end. Naruto spoke loud enough for the toothpick chewing man to hear him ask the judge, what will happen if Sasuke doesn't make it in time? The man gave him a languid glance in return. If he doesn't make it here by the time of his match, he'll receive a default loss. Naruto was disturbed by his rival's tardiness and thought, this doesn't feel right. Sasuke would have been here even if he had to pull himself by his fingers. Okay. Listen closely, the judge, who was noticeably healthier than the previous one, said. The arena might be different, but the same rules as the preliminaries apply. There are no rules. You will fight until death, surrender, or until I decide one of you can't continue. You will cease any attacks if I call an end to the match. Is that understood? Good. First match, Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Neji. You stay while the rest of you go to the waiting room. Naruto watched as someone in the crowd was knocked down while he waited for the match to begin. The person on her right was frantically trying to straighten his nose, and Hinata was scowling at him. Kiba was also present. Akamaru seemed unsure of what to do with himself, and Kiba was obviously shocked. Naruto pondered, I wonder who hit that guy and why. Ranma remarked smugly, I might venture a guess, but don't want to reveal it to you yet. Pay more attention to our opponent than the spectators. With assurance, Neji questioned, do you have something to say? Naruto blurted, as a matter of fact, I do, before Ranma had a chance to stop him. You needlessly injured and hurt Hinata-chan, your cousin, and I'll repay you what she couldn't with interests. A safe distance away from most jutsu, the judge declared, you seem anxious to fight, so let's just begin. Neji declared, I'll enjoy making you face up to reality, as he slid into a slack stance and pointed to Naruto with his left hand. Experienced fighters typically realize that fighting a Hyuga up close is suicide and decide to fight from a distance in the hopes that something will get through. One of the main goals of the training Naruto had undergone was to develop the skills necessary to avoid most of the damage on his own and deliver a few retaliatory strikes. While he was at it, Naruto had Ranma, who could guide him toward undoing a lot of the damage done by closing the tenketsu. As he rushed in, Naruto launched a barrage of punches and kicks, the majority of which were blocked, causing the majority of the ninja currently in the stands to groan at his fatal error. Neji hit Naruto's now protective forearms in a quick counterattack that was only visible as a blur. Naruto lowered his arms and smiled, even though he was supposed to be unable to use them. Between the two teenagers, there was silence. Naruto unzipped his jacket and threw it into a tree without turning away from Neji. A thick, black vest that some instantly recognized as a weighted vest was visible underneath. He also had additional weights on his forearms, as demonstrated by lifting the leg of his pants. Naruto removed the weights and threw them under the same tree as the jacket to demonstrate that, despite the finger-wide dents on the weights on his forearms, the skin underneath was undamaged. Neji may have misjudged the thickness when attacking or failed to notice the additional padding when searching for the tenketsu, but it didn't matter because the dead last of that year's graduating class had made the Hyuga prodigy look foolish. Naruto had raised the weight for his training during the final days of his regimen. It was quite odd to move after the weights were taken off, creating a lovely depression in the ground beneath the tree where they were thrown, because he was barely feeling the 400 pounds he had been carrying. With a mocking question, "Should we try again?" Naruto made the hand seal that his friends had come to expect of him. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. While the real Neji stayed out of reach, a dozen solid clones appeared and rushed him. Neji witnessed this action, and he saw no other way out than the one he chose to take despite the storm of sai and machete, as well as the hail of shuriken and kunai. Kaden. A spinning dome of chakra materialized, displacing the projectile weapons and knocking the attacking clones off their feet a few meters away. It then vanished in tiny puffs of smoke. According to Ranma's analysis, chakra forced out in all directions from all over the body, while spinning around, creates a shield that not only stops but also deflects attacks to such a degree that the attacker is hurt. It shouldn't be too hard to replicate. In fact, this is perfect for people who have a lot of chakra, a lot of creativity, and little control over their thoughts. Naruto said, impressive, as the glowing dome faded and was reabsorbed into its caster. Nevertheless, he felt confident enough to go a little bit farther in order to get his opponent to react. According to Ranma's assessment, "I bet I could learn that inside a day." Naruto smirked boldly, knowing that a deepened frown was more than enough of a victory. After receiving a warning from Ranma that Neji was getting ready for battle, the blonde produced his nunchaku, the only weapon he had yet to use. Neji declared, "You're within my field of divination," snorted at the weapon selection, and then erupted into action. Hake Rokuhui on show. Naruto was given an extra second to prepare before the attack, which allowed him to get the weapon moving. He was able to deflect the attacks on most of his vital points by using the limited Kachu Tenshin Amagorikan that Ranma had been teaching him, though some of his less important tenketsu were closed. Neji held his hands, which had surprisingly only been severely bruised rather than broken by the metal weapon with a lead core. After the attack was over, they ought to have caused significant harm despite the padding surrounding it. The ferocious attack had knocked Naruto down, but he slowly got back up. The nunchaku was already firmly in Naruto's grasp as a light key pressure was causing the closed tenketsu to reopen inside his body. Even though he was barely able to move his arms or legs, Naruto fought the urge to fall to the ground once more to show the Hyuga prodigy that he had been the victim of one of the most notorious attacks in the Hyuga clan's history, which is supposed to kill or render any victim completely useless. Naruto teased that the best you got, but the effect was greatly diminished by the slight dyspnea. "No," Neji shot back, "even with the few tenketsu I closed, you can't form chakra to fight me. You should surrender now, while you're still capable of walking out on your own." Naruto said, "Not gonna happen," and came back. He could already feel his mobility coming back. "You're still going to pay for what you did to Hinata-chan." Proctor called Neji, "You should end the match now, because I intend on killing him if we continue." Naruto yelled, "You talk too much." He was deeply offended by the suggestion that he was incapable of defending himself. Bakusei Tenketsu. The dark-haired boy was hidden from view as the dirt bulged upwards towards Neji before exploding into a spray of rock, dirt, and dust. Naruto ignored Ranma's objections and attacked Neji with his limited Kachu Tenshin Amagorikan and his nunchaku, mimicking the moves Ranma had written down from Neji's previous attack. Neji saw an attack coming after being hit by a lot of dust, but he was not ready to face a rough, twisted version of the Hyuga clan's coveted jutsu. As a result, he was only able to block half of the strikes. The other half caused blunt force damage to his body, which resulted in a ruptured spleen, a broken left clavicle, a cracked lower right rib, and 2 closed tenketsu in his right arm. Neji attempted to get back up despite his pain, but he fell. Naruto was not unhurt by his attack. A number of his muscles were torn, but by the time he stopped, the majority of them had healed enough to enable him to perform those moves more easily in the future. After a brief examination, the proctor pronounced Naruto the winner, and a group of medic nin quickly left Neji to tend to his wounds before they became too serious. Ignoring the angry, scared, or amazed looks he received, Naruto collected his belongings and strode through the door to the contestants' waiting room. This room, which was facing the arena and only had a rail protecting it, had one fewer wall than usual, allowing the contestants to watch the match below. Yes, there was excitement because the person who was least likely to win turned out to be better than expected, but the shock of witnessing someone other than a Hyuga master that dreaded technique kept those who knew how complicated it was quiet. Despite the shocked looks he received from his fellow Konoha genin, Naruto strode confidently up to the railing. Even in the waiting room, however, it made no difference because, as he had promised, he had exacted revenge on Hinata for the humiliation and harm she endured. That was really dumb, reprimanded Ranma. Even in spite of my objections, you had to go ahead and dispel their suspicions that something wasn't quite right. We're fortunate that Anbu hasn't arrested us yet. In fact, I'm confident they'll be scuttling out of the woods to get us as soon as the test is over. After this, Naruto ignored the tirade and focused on the proctor. Much of the crowd was growing restless, and Sasuke had not yet appeared. If this had been any other competitor, the match would have been automatically cancelled for the absent party, but not for Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto wasn't overly shocked when, after waiting for a few minutes, it was announced that Sasuke's fight with Gaara would be postponed. Naruto continued to find it annoying and surveyed the stands that were in view. It was easy to identify Hinata because she was sitting next to a boy who had a puppy on his head and another man covering his nose. A boy in green stood beside Kiba, excitedly showing the two teenagers how much he had healed. Rock Lee. Maeda Guy, the leader of Team Guy, which consisted of Lee, Neji, and Ten, was standing behind the boy. He was staring straight into the waiting area, and even from over 100 meters away, it was obvious who he was staring at. Guy, who had seen or heard about the fight, was analyzing Naruto with a fresh perspective. In a sudden good guy pose, Lee said, "And if I can't do that, I'll carry more weight and run 500 laps around Konoha on my hands." Loud enough to be heard over the hundreds of men and women discussing the turn of events. Lee. Guy-sensei. After announcing Sasuke, the proctor continued, "And now, the next match is between Aburame Shino and Kankuro." He had to wait until the commotion subsided, which Lee and Guy's interaction had done. "Come down." Kankuro declared, "I forfeit," without even getting out of the waiting area. Additionally, this caused a little stir at this point. The majority of the hopefuls were so agitated that they jumped in without thinking about strategy or their own mortality, which was extremely unusual for a Chunin hopeful to surrender at such a time and location. The matchups could be changed because most people had the common sense to quit before the final match if they weren't sure of their skills. With her fan open beneath her, the blonde sand Kunoichi snorted and whipped out a gust of wind, which she then gently floated down into the arena. Remembering that Shikamaru was meant to fight her, Naruto chose to give the hesitant boy a friendly pat on the back to support him in whatever choice he made. Unfortunately, he shoved the Nara boy over the railing due to the additional weight on his arm and his failure to adjust for it. Although Ranma hadn't intended for Shikamaru to fall over the side and 4 meters to the ground, he was a little irritated with the boy for disregarding his protests during the battle with Neji and thought it would be beneficial for the blonde to see what his hasty decisions could lead to. Naruto yelled, "Sorry," over the motionless figure of Shikamaru on the ground, lying on his back. The Kunoichi, who was prepared to fight, Tamari, did not like the laziness her opponent was giving himself. She expressed her displeasure by slashing her fan at him, causing a huge dust and air explosion where Shikamaru had been lying down. After the dust settled, Shikamaru was discovered standing idly on 2 kunai he had stabbed into the wall above the blast zone. As Shikamaru transitioned from a lengthy period of dodging and evading to attacking, Ranma was working extra hours to record the attacks and maneuvers the two fighters employed. A fan of some kind would be needed to replicate the majority of those wind attacks, but that was the purpose of a clone and transformation combination. He only made Naruto acquire real weapons rather than turning some clones into them because, in contrast to clones, real weapons could withstand some damage before disintegrating, making them more dependable than tools that would disintegrate into smoke after a single powerful blow. There was little doubt that the boy would get promoted, even if he didn't win, Ranma said when Shikamaru gave up after being on the brink of victory. The mark of a good leader is to know when to give up and save the lives of his teammates or members. When Shikamaru used the gopher-sized tunnel Naruto had made with his Bakusai Tenketsu to slip in his shadow through the wide opening and out the finger-thick hole behind Temari, it demonstrated excellent preparation and environmental awareness. In a whirl of green leaves, Sasuke and Kakashi appeared in the center of the arena as Ranma was telling Naruto this. Since a lot could change between points A and B, Ranma suggested against trying the technique until they had a look at the beginning, even though they had a good idea of how it was supposed to look upon arrival. Ranma saw the technique's departure end shortly after the proctor assured the two that Sasuke's fight had been postponed and that they were on time. He acknowledged that there were discrepancies between the technique's beginning and ending, which he felt were unnecessary, and that he would attempt to correct them before he was ready to let Naruto learn it. Their trust had been somewhat damaged by Naruto's actions, and Ranma would have to persuade him to learn a lot more from him, particularly the sealed techniques, until the blonde boy could demonstrate some maturity in applying his knowledge. Perhaps because there was less mass to move, Kakashi's departure was not as spectacular as his arrival. The battle between Sasuke and Gaara was an interesting sight to witness. The last Konoha Uchiha had greatly improved his strength and speed, which made it more difficult to mimic Lee's fighting style right away. However, he was still not on par with Lee, and after a few series of attacks, he began to perspire like a pig and pant like a dog. Ranma thought it was impressive when the boy with the raven hair ran up a wall, lit his right hand with lightning, and then ran back down, digging a trench where the hand almost made contact. He thought the technique could be at least half decent if it were improved and had some restrictions on chakra. Ranma noticed two unsettling things as Sasuke's lightning-covered hand sank into the dense cocoon of sand that Gaara had encased himself in. The first was that Gaara briefly went savage and revealed killer intent, which was enough to paralyze weak-willed people. The second was that, after being so energized that he was practically bouncing in place just moments before, Naruto began to feel exhausted. When Naruto noticed that he wasn't the only one growing weary, he raised concerns with Ranma and had to create the Ram Seal to break the delusion that had been imposed on them. Kai. An explosion erupted from the edge of Konoha almost immediately after Naruto's system had neutralized the illusion. One conclusion could be drawn from all of these factors: Konoha was being attacked. Naruto believed it all to be a dream, despite the fact that he was in the center of it. He had just been watching a one-on-one match between the two main tournament attractions, but now a full-fledged fight was going on inside the arena. Several skilled Anbu and shinobi hurried out to defend their clients from assault as soon as the genjutsu was cast, assuming they hadn't been mistaken. In the crowds, Sand and Sound Ninja rose up, took off their disguises, and attacked the closest Leaf Nin. As he hurried to save the Hokage, who was fighting the Case Cage, and Anbu sliced through two Sand Nin, it turned out that the Case Cage was actually Orochimaru in disguise. As they made their ninja-style escape over the wall and across the rooftops beyond, Gaara's brother and sister grabbed the confused and hurt redhead. Three enormous snakes with what appeared to be bibs fastened to their heads were visible to Naruto in the distance. Naruto saw that Sasuke, apparently without any encouragement from anyone, took off after Gaara as the battle raged. The sound of meat and bone hitting hard, unforgiving stone jolted Naruto out of his stunned reverie. Naruto-kun. A voice spoke loudly. A battlefield is no place for philosophy. We're under attack. I'll defeat more enemies than you can. And if I can't do that, I'll do 5,000 hits on the training log. Yash. When Naruto turned around, he saw Lee running off to battle the next group of ninja, who were all much more experienced and not Gen, and none of them had a chance behind him. A headless sand-uniformed ninja lay smashed along the wall, blood gushing from the open wound where perhaps the most important body part was absent. Come to a decision, Ranma added, to ensure that Sasuke doesn't get his spoiled ass handed to him. Either stay here and fight or follow him. Naruto made the decision. Can't let the bastard get killed. Sakura would tear my head off. Naruto slammed his thumb into the ground after biting a hole in it. Kachiyose no Jutsu. A cloud burst from the spot where he had hit the ground, and two bull-sized toads with two swords on their backs sat ready as it dissipated. Naruto might have summoned Gamajichi or Gamabunta instead of the toad he was searching for if Ranma hadn't taught him the summoning jutsu. One said, "What's up, boss? Konoha is under attack by Sand and Sound, and I'm gonna follow my teammate, who is chasing a trio of Sand Nin," Naruto said. "I don't know you very well, but you gave me the impression that this was the sort of thing you'd enjoy. I need you to make sure I won't get stopped by an enemy. Would you do that?" "Sure thing, boss," the other toad said with a hollow croak. "You summoned us, it's your decision." "Then let's go," Naruto exclaimed with a smile before leaping from the room. He ran across the arena, up the wall, and from rooftop to rooftop, with the two toads on either side and right behind him. With a closer look, Naruto saw that the village was not being overrun by 3 enormous snakes, but rather by a 3-headed serpent, a toad almost as large as Gamabunta, and a pair of swords on its back. The two toads occasionally swerved out of the way during the Konoha chase, followed by the sounds of a brief altercation. They then reappeared, slicing red liquid from their swords before sheathing them once more and catching up to Naruto at one point. A quartet of sound nin blocked Naruto from his prey. The two toads ran ahead of Naruto and eliminated the threat so quickly that the boy barely noticed until the enemy ninja were literally falling to pieces. As they cleared the wall around the village, Ranma said, "Perhaps we could get these guys to show us a few things when this invasion's over." Once more, the toads briefly left his side but returned when he touched down on his first tree branch. Naruto wondered for a moment why he was jumping from tree to tree. Before Gaara's fight, everything had appeared to be going well. Why would anyone attack Konoha? Would everyone be alright? More importantly, would the attack not destroy Ichiraku's ramen stand? After jumping from branch to branch, Naruto finally heard the sounds of combat in the distance. Naruto focused on the battle that was going on by turning a few degrees to the left, where he saw Shino and Kankuro engaged in combat. As he continued to follow Sasuke, Temari, and Gaara, the boy gave the toads the signal to ignore them and follow him, as he appeared to have it under control. The blonde boy leapt higher into the trees and passed above them after Ranma warned Naruto about some impending traps a little further on the toads, who had also found the explosive tags affixed to the trunks in a box pattern that would probably detonate if someone got in their way. Followed suit. Clever, quickly posted, but ingenious all the same. It took a few more minutes to see the indications of another battle ahead, and Naruto accelerated toward it as soon as he did. Based on the information provided, Sasuke was not doing well. Naruto winced as the toads, acting on the information he had given them, rushed in to tend to the red-headed teen. However, they were stopped by the sand, caught by the sand, and crushed by the sand. Dispelling them, they would not forget that, and they might not want to teach him their sword moves when he summoned one of them again. "Clone," suggested Ranma, "and just so you know, I'll take charge and get us away if I see something coming that you don't." Naruto created 2 clones by crossing his hands in a well-known hand seal. He gave one of them an old kunai with 5 explosive tags attached before hiding away. This would be noisy. The monstrous limb of sand that covered Gaara's arm and most of his right side was about to crush Sasuke, but the second clone sprang out and swept him away. The clone carrying a protesting Sasuke disappeared into hiding a few trees away, just like the original. However, the armed clone rushed in and allowed himself to be crushed by Gaara's hideous hold. There was a startling silence at first. Naruto quickly shoved his dirt-covered fingers into his ears after looking up from his hiding spot in a hastily excavated hollow beneath a massive tree. Right now, hygiene was not the most important thing to worry about. A deep noise roared along like a sandstorm, enveloping and shaking everything as the light brightened, flaring up to almost blinding levels even in Naruto's hiding place. Then there was silence again. Naruto looked out of his hole and saw the devastation his explosive notes had caused. Beginning at Gaara's location, the trees nearest to him were uprooted and burned to a crisp. 1 or 2 trees had fallen on weaker trees, snapping them in 2 or removing branches from one side. The next ones were just torn out by the roots and were leaning against the next row of trees, assuming they could support them. Gaara was standing in the center, bleeding heavily from his right arm but otherwise unharmed, though he appeared lightheaded and was clearly disturbed by a loud ringing in his ears. Temari, who appeared to have escaped the heat and pressure relatively unharmed, was draped across one of the fallen trees. Naruto remarked, "That guy sure can take a beating." "Not really," Ranma clarified, "most of the damage was taken by his sand. Observe how the sand is moving away from the ground, as if it were only there to keep him safe." Gaara began to snicker as she emerged from the shock and daze of the explosion. He began to chuckle as the snickering intensified, and soon he was laughing uncontrollably. "He's snapped," noted Ranma. Naruto swiftly took off his jacket, undid the straps that held his weights in place, and tucked them all under the tree where he had hidden for safety. This left him with his weapons in place, wearing a black undershirt, orange pants, and blue sandals. Naruto concurred with Ranma that, "This guy's lost all his marbles," as the red-haired boy went on to laugh and rant incoherently about proving his existence and letting him out. Who needs to be let out? Seems more like someone needs to be locked in. Sand began to flow from the earth. Naruto was unaware that there was so much sand beneath the dense forest. Gaara appeared to have entered a trance as the silicate matter poured out more and more, enclosing and burying her. 2 trunks of sand rose, merging to split again, taking on a more pronounced shape while the fatter one went up, The other went backwards, thinning out into a pear-like shape that gave rise to 3 more protrusions until a long-tailed, bipedal body towered over the forest. A raccoon? Naruto asked himself, gazing up at the enormous shape, with a pimple? Do you require spectacles? Ranma yelled. That's Gaara, not a pimple. And now is the time to move? One of the enormous feet crashed into the ground where the two had been standing just a moment before as Naruto followed Ranma's instructions. The beast's shrill, mad voice roared, "Gah! Stand still, will you? I'm finally free. I'm gonna squish you, puny human, and then I'll find some more." After expressing regret to Naruto for what he was about to do, Ranma took control of Naruto's body and applied the exact replica of the transport method that Kakashi had unintentionally taught him because he had not had time to perfect it. The enormous sand raccoon screamed, "Where'd he go?" and raised his feet to see if he had stepped on him by mistake without realizing it or getting to enjoy it. The raccoon, unable to locate him, turned its attention to Konohagakure, a definite source of squishable humans to deliberately step on. All right. Let the party begin. The air around Ranma, who was controlling Naruto's body, was screaming as he descended quickly several hundred meters above the enormous beast. If this creature is brought out by going into a trance, Ranma thought, then this should be resolved by waking him up. Ranma released his machete from his lower back and assumed a stance he had used against Naruto more times than he would like to recall, ignoring the frightened cries of Naruto in his mind. "Have it thee," the boy with the whiskers said with nostalgia. Without such a statement, this technique just wouldn't be the same. Whump. Feeling uneasy, the sand creature stopped in the middle of his stride. For whatever reason, he was lighter. He looked back to see his tail vanishing into a shapeless sandmass. This was an extremely uncommon occurrence. Huge elemental beasts are initially perplexed, just like the majority of people who have a spontaneous amputation. Then, as the mind works through what has happened, the pain starts. People fighting in Konoha had to cover their ears to see what was going on as the creature screamed, "Gar-gh!" in a bellow that could be heard all over the nation. Only a small portion, barely more than a sliver, fell from the raccoon. After that, there will be more like a deck of cards laid out on end. The enormous creature broke apart piece by piece, like a loaf of bread. The raccoon may have sensed someone hitting Gaara from above with just enough force to bring the boy to his senses if he hadn't been in pain from having so much taken away from his conscious control. Unfortunately, the raccoon could only scream as the sand crumbled. The boy's already slowed fall was lessened when Ranma gave Naruto control and he fell into a falling pile of sand. A few bones were bruised, but they healed quickly. Gaara looked up into space below him, stunned by the pain he was experiencing. Naruto grunted at the redhead, attempting for a brief moment to climb onto the sand rather than sinking into it. "That was stupid," he said. Gaara turned without a word, staring at him in astonishment with wide eyes. Naruto went on to say, "You had no control over that thing." Quoting Ranma, "Are you really that heartless, releasing an uncontrollable beast on hundreds, even thousands of innocent human beings?" A mound of sand rose from the ground, swaying briefly before collapsing, but Gaara did nothing to refute or validate this accusation. "And you tired yourself out," Naruto went on. "You must learn to pace yourself in a fight because there is no assurance that using all of your energy at once will result in victory. Always save some for later. What gave you the impression that your beast would be any different from the enormous beast that already attacked this village and was vanquished by one man? Due to the fact that you carried it? The Kyuubi no Kitsune is something I carry, but I haven't used it once in this battle because I won't depend on anyone else to give me the strength to protect my loved ones as the future Hokage. I plan to defend Konoha with my life if necessary. That is my Nindo." Naruto noticed a slight change in Gaara's eyes during his tirade, but he didn't really know what he was talking about. It was just all coming out. Perhaps he had struck his head during his landing. Concussions were supposed to make people talk incoherently. However, he dimly realized that he had mentioned his beliefs. Ranma told Naruto that the blurs were Kankuro and Temari, and that they had shown sincere concern for their injured teammate. Camaraderie. It was a beautiful thing. Before any further discussion could occur, the blurs appeared on either side of Gaara and were traveling quickly, leaving the country in the battle. Ranma briefly took control and avoided a fist to Naruto's head. "Naruto!" Sakura bellowed angrily, "You allowed an enemy to get away." However, teammates could also be a person's death. Shikamaru stood passively a short distance behind Sakura, watching a hideous little dog dig in the sand. Oddly enough, the dog had a lead symbol on its forehead protector. Was it from Kiba's clan? What was it digging for? "Hi, Sakura," Naruto said nonchalantly, as if she hadn't just yelled at him or attempted to remove his head. How is the battle going? How many enemy ninja have you recently repelled? Naruto's eye twitched as he realized the dog was a talking dog, one that had just called itself a cute little puppy, only one of which was true, and it wasn't the first or last description. Oi, a little help here, I'm only a cute little puppy, said a deep, gravelly, and solemn voice. It must be a summoned creature, Ranma thought, because they appear to be able to talk and think, but I'm doubting its intelligence if it believes it's cute or young. Naruto noticed a black head of hair emerging from the sand as he looked down from the hallucinogenic dog. Kun Sasuke. Sakura let out a panicked cry and arrived at the side of the unconscious boy more quickly than Ranma had with her instant transport method. Naruto began searching for landmarks, complaining humbly that he was not being appreciated. He still needed to recover his jacket and weights, which could be buried anywhere. Sakura had finished extracting Sasuke, who had a bump on his head and a mouthful of sand as a result of his struggle and pursuit, after Naruto had retrieved his belongings from the sand after many arduous minutes of searching and making shadow clones to assist. Naturally, Sakura leapt to the conclusion that Naruto had contributed by watching the three sand nin make their escape, and that Sasuke had destroyed the demon and been buried in his exhaustion as the creature fell to pieces. Ranma didn't need to tell Naruto to stop talking before he said something he might regret, so she left the girl to her convictions. Naturally, Shikamaru had volunteered to assist in transporting Sasuke to the hospital, but he was cautious in how he expressed his disapproval. Despite what either conscious boy told her, Sakura had followed Naruto and Shikamaru as they carried half of Sasuke's weight each, fearing that the bruise on his head was a sign of something more serious. Oddly enough, the girl did not seem to contribute to any work, but Ranma told Naruto not to question this because it would only result in unnecessary violence and pain, their pain. Naruto, with his weights back on, had to help Sasuke all the way, which was no easy task, and the distance they had all covered to get to the fight had been surprisingly long for what had felt like a short run at the time. Not because Sasuke was heavy, but because he was cumbersome. By the time the quartet and dog reached the village, the fighting had stopped, almost half of the village was on fire, and the ninja who were not hurt were either rushing around putting out the fires with whatever tools they had or assisting the civilians who had been hiding. The Sandaime Hokage's mountain portrait had a crack across its face, which made Naruto wonder what else might have happened. Naruto thought he would much rather be back in combat after arriving at the hospital because it was at least more orderly and peaceful. Along the walls were civilians and injured ninja, some of whom were standing. Nurses and doctors rushed back and forth, trying to assist as best they could. Concerned friends and family members of the injured were pestering the doctors about their availability. Naruto was almost taken aback by the absence of a wall of corpses piled along the hallway. However, as soon as a nurse saw Sasuke, 3 doctors began bidding for the privilege of treating him, and Sakura anxiously followed him. Naruto didn't think he needed to stay any longer. Jiraiya appeared before him in a blur and stopped him just as he was about to step outside. The white-haired pervert said solemnly, "Come with me," and began to sprint up the hospital's exterior wall. Following Jiraiya's instructions, Naruto stopped beneath the window where Jiraiya had stopped. As he peered inside, he noticed a familiar tuft of white beard emerging from a mask attached to a metal lung machine, and a group of doctors rushing around the room. Jiraiya promised, if they're fast enough, he'll survive, but he won't be able to walk again. He gave the two of us one last task before he was sedated. We're going out to find the Godem Hokage and, if necessary, drag her back by her pigtails. I was asked to do it by the elderly man, with suspicion, Naruto asked. Yes, Jiraiya replied. We leave as soon as possible, so you'd better hurry home and pack. I'll be waiting for you at the east gate. The old pervert made his own preparations and vanished in a flash of speed after delivering his message. The old man wanted Naruto to leave the village for some reason, so he made arrangements for him to go on that mission. Ranma didn't even need to mention this. The question still stood. Why was it necessary to do that? Naruto dropped to the ground and headed for his apartment. He was considering this when he almost bumped into Hinata, who was coming around a corner. Naruto-kun, she said, half timidly, though her face was still flushed pink. Hinata-chan, Naruto said back, how are you? I take it that the invasion did not injure you. In response, Hinata said, I'm fine, Naruto-kun. Has anyone been injured? The sad response from Hinata was, only Shino-kun was hurt, Naruto-kun, who was poisoned but is currently receiving treatment from his family. He will be alright. What are you doing? The girl's face almost burst into bright red as she asked this, as though she had unknowingly said something utterly obscene. I'm packing for a trip, said Naruto. The old man sent me on a mission, but I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about it. Hinata said, I get it, Naruto-kun, how long will you be gone? Naruto sighed and said, I don't know, it could be an hour or several months, I have not yet been informed of all the specifics. Oh, groaned a deflated Hinata after giving Hinata a quick, hopefully amicable hug. Naruto said, I'd better go, don't want the old pervert to get impatient, and fled. See you later, Hinata-chan. Unaware that he had left behind a red glowing girl who could have supplanted the sunset in radiance, Naruto fled for the second time that day. With an expression of unwavering resolve, Naruto approached Jiraiya, who was standing just outside the east gate. The man was about to leave when the boy warned him, You owe me the Yondaime's most prized jutsu, and you will teach it to me. Just because we're on a mission doesn't mean I forgot your promise from before the finals, he said. After appearing to raise an objection, Jiraiya shrugged and turned to leave Konohagakure. Hey, await my arrival. Naruto had to run a short distance to catch up after calling, which was made more difficult by the weights on his limbs and the bulky backpack he was carrying. He had also dared not abandon his ninja gear. We won't have much time for training, Jiraiya stated as Naruto slowed to match his pace once caught up. Most of the day between towns, we'll be busy traveling. Additionally, we must search towns for anyone who might have seen her. Hold on, her? Naruto realized, is a girl going to be the next Hokage? Jiraiya laughed, she's my age, so woman would be more accurate, before his eyes glazed over with lustful imagination. Get out of it quickly. Naruto snarled and kicked the elderly pervert in the shins. For what purpose did you do that? Jiraiya insisted, you ought to respect your sensei a little. When you quit being a pervert, I'll respect you, Naruto retorted sharply, and I'll show you. I'll demonstrate my ability to pick up a skill while traveling by becoming proficient in the Yondaime's highly valued jutsu. Remember that I will not assist you with it, Ranma reminded them. Naruto insisted, I'll do it alone. I learned the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu in one night on my own, and I'll manage this one as well, he said. Jiraiya thought, we'll see about that, and he took a balloon out of his pocket and used a weak water jutsu to inflate it. Ranma took pride in saying he had witnessed it and would investigate further. Jiraiya held the balloon out to Naruto and then made it explode as if a bomb had been placed inside it. It had begun small, as if there were little poles sticking out of the rubber, but they had stretched the surface too far and it exploded. This is the first step to learning the jutsu, Jiraiya said wisely before creating another water balloon and dropping it into Naruto's hands, instructing him to burst it like I did. We'll proceed to the next phase once you can accomplish that without creating any holes. For a moment, Naruto pondered his next move while he weighed the balloon in his hands and listened to the water sloshing around inside. Ranma sighed and said, all right, let me give you a hint to get you started. He rotated chakra inside the balloon, setting the water in motion enough to burst the rubber surface. With an exaggerated insult, Naruto sniffed, I don't need your help. Whatever his mental statement, Naruto followed the thought process prompted by Ranma's clue and began gradually introducing chakra into the water. Before long, he could feel the water swirling against the balloon he was holding. All that occurred was that the internal rotations caused the balloon to flatten itself. This was definitely more difficult than following directions from an old scroll. It took Naruto almost a week to figure out how to make the water balloon explode like Jiraiya had demonstrated, following an epiphany from a cat playing with a ball. It only required spinning the chakra inside in various directions until the balloon was ripped apart by centrifugal forces in a splash of water, and the visible chakra ball vanished shortly after the container was gone. After Naruto demonstrated his abilities, Jiraiya acknowledged, okay, so you got part 1, but the second part will undoubtedly leave you perplexed for some time. Take note. Jiraiya purchased a sack full of what Ranma referred to as hairless tennis balls, and gave Naruto all but one of them. To the unaided eye, the ball simply sat in Jiraiya's outstretched hand before exploding in a rubber storm. This is all you have to do, but I'll warn you right now, it will be about 100 times harder than step 1, said the elderly pervert. By applying what he had previously done with the water balloon to it and boosting the power of the chakra inside until it caused the ball to explode, Naruto was able to finish this step in less than an hour, which was completely unexpected for Jiraiya. As Naruto grinned at his own accomplishment, the Toad Sannin cautioned, don't get too cocky. He had only used 3 of the balls, so he had some playthings to try out various techniques on. This is the hardest step. Taking out a balloon, Jiraiya tied it shut after pumping air into it until it was roughly the same size as the water balloon. He then merely held the balloon in his hand, signaling to Naruto that he wanted his attention. Although Naruto was unable to see what was happening, he surmised that it was related to what he had already learned. Jiraiya said, "Let's see what it looks like inside," following nearly a minute of silence. A whirling ball of chakra materialized in his other hand, suckling in air around it and emitting a bright blue glow, generating a fresh breeze. Perhaps to motivate him, Jiraiya touched the Rasengan gently to a tree trunk, where a spiral pattern carved itself into it with ease, causing wood chips and strips to fall to the ground. Unlike the last two steps, the object of this lesson is to use both of them without breaking the rubber casing, Jiraiya said. The front of the original tree was still standing, with only two spiral carvings, but Jiraiya drew the ball of chakra away, aimed lower, and then thrust it in, causing the back of the tree to explode outward and destroying a trail of trees behind it. When Naruto was given his own balloon, his usual excitement overcame his newly developed caution. "Pop!" Jiraiya laughed, "Keep trying," and gave the boy a bag of deflated balloons. As he tried to figure out how to have the same power as his previous two steps while keeping the balloon surface perfectly smooth and undisturbed, Naruto regained his composure and ignored the laughter in his head. Naruto was so engrossed in training with Ranma and attempting to figure out the Rasengan on his own that he forgot even their mission as he gazed at the cheerful, inflated rubber bladder in his hand. He also lost track of the number of towns they visited together or even the number of days that went by. The balloon didn't burst because the swirling was so weak that it couldn't damage it, but he could make the chakra spin inside in the pattern it was meant to move in. Sitting in the room where he and Jiraiya had gone together, the blonde demon container moaned darkly, "I'm sure the old coot skipped a step." He had given up trying to distinguish between them because they all had the same appearance and sound, and he assumed that Jiraiya was out, gathering information, or something. Ranma helpfully added, "Or you could be a total idiot, but too stubborn to realize it." Naruto argued, "That proves I'm not dumb. I got the Kachu Tenshin Amagorican right a few days ago, didn't I?" With sage advice, Ranma added, "Even a monkey can imitate someone if they watch long enough." "Shut up," snarled Naruto. "Pop. I'm down to my final three, damn it." Knock, knock, knock. "What? Who might that be?" Ranma suggested that the neighbors might be complaining about the loud outbursts and muttering, but she cautioned that the people on the opposing side are powerful. "Hostile. Definitely. Why answer the door, then?" Ranma recalled, because if they were determined enough, they wouldn't let a door stop them. The best defense is a strong and surprising offense, catches them off guard. Naruto nodded to himself and opened the door, maintaining an innocent and inquisitive look to deceive those on the other side. A large man with blue skin, spiky blue hair, gills on his cheekbones, and jagged teeth stood in the hallway. He looked like a shark. Overall on his back was a handle that was fastened to something long and thick that was covered in fish-like scales or sharp spikes and was wrapped in ragged bandages. Just in front of this fearsome beast, there was Sasuke. "What happened to you?" asked Naruto, perplexed. "You appear so elderly. And why is that cloak so dumb looking?" The man moved so that the collar of the cloak covered the lower half of his face and said, emotionlessly, "You have me confused with my younger brother. I am Uchiha Itachi, and I am here to retrieve you." Final attack Saotome. "I apologize. I'm on a mission. It was good to meet you, but you ought to visit your brother sometime in Konoha. He seems to be very lonely." "Good day," Naruto said more quickly than he had intended, then slammed the door and leapt out the window. Even a civilian would have sensed the shark man's ferocious intent to kill him, as Itachi didn't appear to have any emotion to wipe away his indifference, and he didn't need to have a keen sense of hearing to know that the door was reduced to splinters just a moment after it struck the frame. "I was aware that I shouldn't have gambled. Bad guys always find gamblers," the boy moaned, jumping across the rooftops in erratic patterns to dodge possible projectiles. As they swung to higher ground using a telephone wire, Ranma noted, "It was pretty impressive winning enough tokens to fill a sack large enough to fit the two of us, but playing a single token in a Biju-themed slot machine is hardly gambling. And switching to paper money that takes up less room was a good idea, but we have a bigger problem here." Naruto doubled back to the inn where they stayed, using Shushin no Jutsu to get behind the two assailants, hoping that Jiraiya Bamf was present. Jiraiya's self-assured and mocking voice proclaimed, "You guys should know better than to attack my protege while I'm still alive." From atop a large horned toad with thick wrist guards and large swords on its back. Naruto stopped running to watch the scene unfold, but the shark-like man continued to attack, growling and tearing the weapon from his back. The violent man was stopped by Itachi, and the shark man backed off as he made his point with some unsaid words, probably without showing any emotion. "That should prevent them from trying again for a while," Jiraiya whispered. but we must proceed swiftly to avoid tempting fate. Additionally, keep in mind that the third step is still crucial because it's a very practical tactic that typically scares off the most seasoned ninja. Because of this and other tactics, the Yondaime gained a good reputation during the most recent conflict. Which one was that? Asked Naruto, who now feels bad for not paying more attention in class because he was certain they had discussed this at some point, most likely while he was sleeping or playing practical jokes. Jiraiya replied, Hiraishin no Jutsu, gazing solemnly into the distance as if reliving the past. A teleportation technique that uses no special seals, so it was almost impossible to predict when he would do it. I'd like to find out. With a technique like that, people are sure to respect me, Naruto exclaimed. With a sorrowful laugh, Jiraiya ruffled the prepubescent ninja's hair and said, we'll see one jutsu at a time. As they were traveling to a different town that day, Naruto was able to figure out what he had done wrong with the third step, either to irritate Jiraiya or to demonstrate his worthiness of learning more jutsu. To keep everything in control and in shape, a shell of chakra had to be created around the swirling madness. When this shell came into contact with a foreign object, it would release its violent contents, causing a funnel blast or tube blast that would destroy anything trapped in the vortex, which could reach a distance of up to 100 meters. Since few ninja would let them remain inside their guard long enough to plant this monster of a blast in their torso, Ranma's only criticism of the technique was that it required close contact before it could be used. This meant that the technique was not finished, as the inventor would have undoubtedly noticed this issue and attempted to fix it. Ranma thought, maybe combining the Moko Takabisha with it. Not bad, Jiraiya said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, except for adding a little more power and possibly speeding it up a bit. It's great. How about I take you to conduct your initial research as a reward? I could help you launch your own book series. To which Naruto replied, no thanks, old man, I want to be accepted, not exiled. Jiraiya chose to ignore the blatantly offensive remark and continue doing what they were meant to do, which was to find the next Hokage. Jiraiya wanted to show Naruto some local history in the form of a daimyo castle, which is no longer in use for its original purpose but still serves as a reminder of the past, while Ranma was teaching him how to sense power around him. But there was still a problem. Where the proud building had once stood, all that was left was a new pile of debris. What gives me the impression that we've located her? As he gazed upon the once glorious castle, Jiraiya muttered. When Naruto and Jiraiya arrived, the fallen castle had been deserted for some time. The elderly man asserted with assurance, she can't have gotten far, after surveying the area for clues that Naruto had missed. How do you know? Naruto inquired, wondering how this could be figured out, and Ranma was also intrigued, since he could only determine the general direction that the individuals present had taken. That means she's been here within a day, and I heard some villagers complaining about how the castle collapsed this morning when we cleared the last wall, Jiraiya said, pointing to what appeared to be a bare patch of ground from where Naruto was standing. Ranma had also noted these, but apparently didn't get as much out of it as Jiraiya did. He pointed to what appeared to be a bare patch of ground. Cheater! Naruto fiercely accused him, trying to sound cool. Importantly, Jiraiya cut in, there's no time for this, we have to find our next Hokage. When nightfall arrived and there were no hints as to the woman's whereabouts other than the fact that she was still in the city, Jiraiya conceded the day's defeat and dragged Naruto into a tavern for dinner. And I'm going to do some research after we're finished, lecherously, the Toad Sannin declared. Gamma-chan isn't coming your way. I'm not buying your excuses, spend your own money, the blonde boy growled, recalling the one and only time he had entrusted the man with his money. He eventually calmed down at Ranma's insistence. I don't know what you mean, Jiraiya said with a scowl, I'm only interested in the welfare of my student and the completion of our mission. Naruto countered, your research has nothing to do with our mission. Of course it well, it's not that big a world, after all, Jiraiya began, gazing contentedly at a tavern corner. Tsunade. As Naruto turned to face his current mentor, he noticed two women and a pig. The blonde, curvaceous woman who slammed her forehead against the table when Jiraiya called was obviously not happy to hear from him, just like all the other women who had heard about him, his interests and his job. Without being invited, Jiraiya sat down opposite the sultry blonde woman and yelled at the waitress to bring him and Naruto a serving of food that would require at least 4 waitresses to carry 3 bowls each. Jiraiya, what do you want? There was something wrong with her, and it was all focused on the diamond tattoo on her forehead. This woman was supposed to be Jiraiya's age, but she barely looked a day over 30, growled the woman, lifting her head so Naruto saw her face, as well as her massive cleavage. This goes far beyond any illusion technique we've ever seen. It's almost like she changed into a younger body. She must be using an illusion to hide her age, Ranma concluded. Though it is masterfully done, there's hardly any trace of chakra being drawn. Yet there is a very large supply stored in that tattoo. Naruto asked, wouldn't that jutsu wear off when she falls asleep? But I'm sure there are ways to maintain a jutsu through lost concentration, Ranma retorted, but who said it doesn't? Can't an old friend drop by to greet you? You hurt me so, my lovely, Jiraiya said with a mocking look of shock. Tsunade responded, not as much as if I hit you for stalling, and Naruto again questioned how the elderly man could have selected someone of that caliber to succeed him. What do you want? The white-haired man said gravely, I'm here to bring you back to Konoha, with all hint of humor gone from his face. Tsunade snapped back, I vowed I wouldn't go back, not after what happened. Jiraiya insisted, Konoha needs you. You've been chosen to be our Godem. The council must really have been desperate to send you, Tsunade snarled, her fingers leaving prints on the table. Jiraiya countered, the council may not even know we're here, they didn't send us no. Sensei sent us because he believed you would be the most qualified person to take over for him now that he is unable to perform his duties. Sensei? I was given the impression that he had died at Orochimaru's hands, when he still had them, Tsunade exclaimed. Her eyes wide with emotion, she recovered her composure, even if her companion or assistant didn't. What did he tell you? So he found you as well, Jiraiya muttered. Konoha is at war with sand and sound, the two women's elder summarized, adding that he fought with Sensei and killed him at the price of his hands. Wounded, Jiraiya clarified, Orochimaru attempted to kill Sensei and burned his arms off. Fortunately, Nin arrived quickly, and after a full day of surgery, Sensei survived, but he is unable to perform his duties, so he sent us to find the best candidate to replace him. You. Tsunade deadpanned, if you think I'll take the job, you're dumber than I thought. If you won't take the job, then at least see what you can do for Sensei's injuries, Jiraiya suggested. If you can heal him, then we won't need a replacement after all. Anyway, what was the traitor after? He had to have some reason to find you, Naruto said. Tsunade shot back, saying, none of your business, kid, and sucked down the remainder of her sake bottle, indicating to the bartender that she needed another. And I said that I won't come back to Konoha, she said. What a coward. Whatever happened in the past doesn't make up for leaving the old man hurt when you could have helped, Naruto yelled, standing and slanting on the table and glaring at the elderly woman. I'd wager that you were assisting Orochimaru and didn't want to run the risk of being discovered if I didn't know any better. Tsunade calmly replied, you don't know what you're talking about, and took the bottle. He wanted you to fix his arms, Jiraiya concluded, but it's impossible to fix something that isn't there. Naruto realized, so he brought a few donors with him, with Ranma's assistance. You have to improve your deductive reasoning skills, Ranma declared in the blonde boy's mind. Nasty, Naruto continued, wearing someone else's arms, ew. Tsunade declared, if you find that concept so disgusting, you haven't got what it takes to be a ninja, as she drank the last of her bottle and blushed noticeably from the alcohol. Quit before you're killed. Oh, she's going down, Naruto declared, without Ranma's argument. Ranma's only remark was, but be careful, she's the best candidate for the Hokage role for a reason. Jiraiya prevented Naruto from going all the way across the table to give the woman a black eye for her observation, but he was halfway there in less than a second, and it was clear that he wasn't fighting hard to break free from the old man's hold. And having a temper won't help keep you alive, the woman said calmly. That's it, now, we're going outside, Naruto exclaimed. I've come a long way in the past month or so, and I don't like it when people underestimate me. When Tsunade told Jiraiya, your apprentice seems to have a death wish. No, but he's fond of the Hokage and aspires to become Hokage one day, replied the individual. Since you insulted him, and Sarutobi and his title, he feels the need to act out. He's still maturing into his job. He needs to learn not to challenge everyone he sees to gratify his ego, Tsunade said. I accept your challenge, boy, let's take this outside. Jiraiya released Naruto with a sigh. The woman with Tsunade appeared on the verge of fainting from the sudden change in circumstances, and Naruto couldn't recall ever seeing eyes that wide since the last time he played a practical joke on Konoha, the good old days. Tsunade stood confidently waiting outside. Let's get started. Declaring this, Naruto assumed a ready stance. Rules first, Tsunade replied. You get to use everything you can think of. I can defeat you with a single finger. What? Naruto, deeply offended by the extent of his undervaluation, demanded. Tsunade went on smugly, holding up Gamma-chan, who had begun to swell once more, and said, In exchange, when you lose, I'll get this cute little wallet of yours, and its content. Monster. Hot Naruto yelled, gimme back my wallet. When she said, should you win, however, I'll give you this, she produced a necklace from her enormous cleavage, saying, it's worth enough to buy several mountains. Why does it all come down to wagers? Naruto moaned and turned his attention to the work at hand. All right, you have a wager. The woman held up her right hand and extended her index finger to indicate that she was ready. Anytime you're ready, she said. While Tsunade's traveling companion and pet appeared to be concerned about the potential harm the woman would cause to the poor youngster, Jiraiya, who was carrying a bottle of beer, appeared to be enjoying the opening act. Naruto would have definitely rushed into this fight without giving any thought other than inflicting some pain if he hadn't been influenced by Ranma for more than a month. However, with Ranma's assistance, he conducted a much more thorough analysis of the situation. After a brief observation, Naruto concluded, okay, she's watching our every move. Using the techniques Ranma had just begun teaching him, he went a little further in his analysis, concluding, she is curious and gathering chakra into her muscles for quick reaction time, speed, and strength. Ranma, who was proud that Naruto was reading the woman correctly enough to understand those things, added, she's also starting to get impatient and might start calling us cowards if we don't act soon. Jutsu no Kage Bunshin. Few shinobi can execute jutsu without the use of hand seals, half seals, or even pre-made seals. Least of all something as sophisticated as the shadow clones. So Tsunade was clearly taken aback when Naruto cried out, eschewing the customary hand seals in favor of pulling kunai from his pouch. Half a dozen Naruto clones charged at Tsunade, concealing the real one in their path. The woman made getting rid of those clones seem so easy that it was hilarious. With a quick turn of her foot here and a prod there, the clones vanished in a matter of seconds. The pendulum effect of her blonde pigtails was an amazing sight, but Naruto honestly found the same effect acting a little lower in front even more fascinating, so he sent another rush of clones at her. Tsunade swiftly scanned her surroundings and ducked and wove gracefully between the onslaughts of shuriken that shot at her from every direction. Even though the clones demonstrated teamwork and skills, Tsunade made it look pitifully simple as she dealt with the clones, who now rushed her from all directions instead of just one. Is that all you can do? Called the woman. Are you sending clones to do your dirty work? No, Naruto replied behind her, causing her to turn on one heel and dodge a whirling ball of chakra that Naruto, who had suddenly materialized, was holding. Her face lit up when she saw the jutsu, and instead of approaching the ball, she grabbed Naruto's forearm and pushed him forward, causing the ball to hit the ground. Whoosh! A tunnel was dug into the street a moment later in a huge cloud of dust. It was tall and wide enough for a man on a horse to pass through comfortably, and it extended over 100 meters down a 30-degree slope. He was obviously better now than when he had first learned the technique, having mastered both the conical and cylindrical blasts. At least there were now the first signs of a walk-in well in the village. Kuso. With a furious curse, Naruto leapt to his feet, forming two more balls in his hands. Cease. Before Naruto could move another step, Tsunade gave the order, where did you learn that jutsu? Snapping, Naruto held the Rasengan away from his body so he wouldn't hurt himself. The old pervert taught me, he said. So what? You gave a novice instruction in one of the most harmful forms of jutsu known to man? Tsunade of Jiraiya was demanded. All right. Jiraiya shrugged and said, he isn't entirely dumb. He used an improvised version of their secret techniques to defeat a Hyuga in the Chunin selection exams. He is capable of managing it. You've known him for how long? Tsunade went on, disregarding Naruto, who was still standing there holding a pair of Rasengan. According to Jiraiya, about a month. And why did you conclude that he could manage the responsibility of possessing such a powerful jutsu in just 1 month? She made a fierce demand. I decided based on his training gusto and tenant, he seemed to indicate. Oh, is that him? This is Naruto. Yes, Jiraiya answered. Hey, let's get this thing done and stop talking about me as if I don't exist. Naruto made a strong demand. You won, said Tsunade. What? I used more than one finger to stop you, she said. I broke the previously agreed upon rules and automatically forfeited the match. Tsunade gave the necklace to Naruto after removing it from her cleavage. It belonged to my grandfather, the Shoden Hokage, she said, securing the item around his neck. Keep it safe. What? Naruto asked shrewdly. Hey, hold on, I can't handle this. You won the bet, Tsunade insisted. Of course you can, you own it. I didn't mean that, complained Naruto. Do not discuss gender bias with others. Besides, I think it's a peace offering of sorts for offending us, Ranma warned. Before Jiraiya began lecturing him about keeping his wallet safe, Naruto was reunited with it inside the tavern and barely succeeded in hiding it in stuff space. A trick Ranma had taken the time to teach him. You young people wouldn't know how to manage his money properly. You're not as responsible as me. Slurping down the ramen that had been brought to their table, Naruto retorted, besides, I hardly use my money. While you spent the money you held for me on your so-called research, it wasn't nearly as good as Ichiraku's, but it was still edible. That, in my opinion, demonstrates which of us is the cautious one. Jiraiya, were you beaten by a child? There hasn't been much of a change over the years, Tsunade smugly teased. You didn't fare better against him, and I'll have you know that research helped locate you, and will probably add another chapter to my next book, Jiraiya sighed. Does that entitle me to purchase your book series as an investor? Wincing at the thought of what some people might do to him if this ever came out, Naruto asked. In theory, Tsunade thought, but you never signed or made any form of contract, and your money was used without your consent. Or that of your legal guardian, so officially I guess it could be called theft. Jiraiya clarified, I would rather call it tuition for everything I'm teaching him. I didn't learn as much from you as I did from myself, Naruto made the accusation. I taught you Kuchios, I taught you Rasengan, and I helped with your training for the exam. Naruto countered, I learned the Kage Bunshin on my own, and I gained Gamabunta's respect, unlike you. Let's not forget that you copied the Kaden crudely after only having seen it once, and you also refused to follow my suggestion for making you stronger. Pardon me? Why don't you take Jiraiya's advice to strengthen yourself, unless it involves spying on women? Tsunade interrupted. It's not, Jiraiya cried out instantly. I don't want to rely on it for strength, Naruto stated prior to further discussion. It's evil, and though I've lived with it all my life, continued exposure to that chakra without having it filtered through me first would corrupt me and increase my chances of an early death or possession. Tsunade remarked, interesting and perceptive observation. Naruto boasted, I'm not as stupid as most of my classmates believed, with pride. How about a different wager? Why place bets? Why can't people just do or don't? Moaned Naruto, slamming his face into the table and upending the tower of empty ramen bowls, which threatened to topple over. You'll like this, Tsunade replied. If you win, I'll come with you back to Konoha to see what I can do for Sarutobi-sensei. But if I win, you'll not only leave me alone forever, but also prevent Jiraiya from peeping as long as you're in his company. That isn't fair. How much work would that be, do you know? Giving up before learning the nature of the difficulty? And I thought you had a pair, Tsunade jeered. I have a pair, Naruto roared, I'll easily defeat your challenge. Good, Tsunade concurred. You need to develop the same level of strength that I do. You've got a month. A month? I'll do it in a week. Exclaimed the blonde boy, shaking a number of glasses in the area. You have a wager. Brat, are you aware of her strength? Jiraiya interrupted, she's one of the few people who can open the great gates of Konoha by herself. It's likely that she crushed that castle with almost no force. And if she had a firm grip, I'm fairly certain she could lift Gamabunta over her head. Tsunade said nonchalantly, sounds about right, adding that you have a week to become that powerful. Good luck spending the rest of your life watching over my perverted teammate. Crap, Naruto said, succinctly describing his predicament.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.